Chapter 190 Point of No Return. Sonny was walking at the back of the cohort, but his shadow was scouting ahead. Without it by his side, he was rather uncomfortable. I wonder if I can summon the Stone Saint while it is away. How have I never thought to check it? Without both his shadow and his shadow, Sonny felt almost naked. At least he had other people with him, including 3 powerhouses, Nephis, Castor, and Effie. Come to think of it, he had never seen Kai in action. The beautiful archer didn't look like someone extremely dangerous, but Sonny wasn't deceived. Weak people did not survive on the Forgotten Shore for years, especially not if their aspect ability made them the perfect person to venture outside the Dark City. With his unique aspect ability, Kai had to fight against the type of terrifying creatures that Sonny knew very little about too. Flying abominations that lived in the clouds, like spire messengers. Scary. Speaking of Kai, Sonny hastened his steps and caught up to the charming young man. Glancing at Cassie, who did not seem like she wanted to say anything to him, he frowned for a moment and then turned to Nightingale. "Hey there, Knight. How's life?" The archer looked at him with a friendly smile. "Oh, hey. Good, I guess. I mean, the weather is nice." Sonny blinked a couple of times. The weather was never nice on the Forgotten Shore. It was either too cold, too damp, or too hot. Honestly, he even missed the Black Mountain sometimes. At least it was consistent. Not one to make polite talk, Sonny went straight to the question he really wanted to ask. "So, really, what are you doing here?" Kai glanced at him with a bit of confusion. "What do you mean?" Sonny sighed. "From what you told me, your life in the castle was nothing short of peaceful. You have enough shards to stay there for a long time. Everyone likes you, and even the hosts treats you nicely because of how useful your ability is. Why would you risk it to go with us to the labyrinth?" The beautiful archer lingered for a bit. Well, actually, I landed in a bit of trouble, I think. The deaths of those guards who locked me in the well are being used to frame Effie, are they not? Well, what if someone knows that I'm connected to their disappearance? Won't I be in danger?" Sonny thought about it for a bit, then reluctantly agreed. "Makes sense. But won't the danger you will face in this expedition be much worse than the one you are escaping from?" Kai smiled. "It certainly will. But, Sonny, there is something else that you have failed to consider." Sonny frowned. "What's that? Please don't tell me that you became one of Neff's converts." The charming young man chuckled. "Converts? No, I don't think so. At least not in the way that you think." He was silent for a long time, then sighed. "Actually, I don't think that many people see things clearly. But really, it's not that hard to understand." Turning to Sonny with a somber expression on his usually carefree face, Kai suddenly asked, "I came to the Forgotten Shore 31 months ago. Do you know how many of us reached the Dark City that year?" Sonny shook his head. The archer grimaced. "Almost 400. And do you know how many are still alive?" "Less than 2. He was silent for a while. "Which means that in just 2 years, more than half of us perished. People die all the time in the Dark City, you see. The castle may seem safe, but actually the host is constantly bleeding people. Every week, a few hunters don't return from the hunt. Every couple of weeks, a nightmare creature attacks the walls and kills several guards before they manage to drive it away or destroy it." Kai sighed. But most of all, something comes into the outer settlement and simply drags away people. And that's not even mentioning those who die of hunger, desperation, or by another human's hands. Do Do you see where I'm going with this? Sunny scowled, a new understanding dawning on him. Seeing his expression, Kai looked away. Indeed. Every year, hundreds of people die in the Dark City. And every year, hundreds more come to take their place. But, Sonny, this year, there were only 4. Not 400, but just 4 people. How had he not thought about it before? Sonny's eyes widened slightly. Meanwhile, Kai continued. Which means that the Bright Castle never got the chance to recoup its losses. What happens if that spell cycle theory that people have is true, and 5 months from now, when the winter solstice comes, the same thing repeats itself? He shook his head, a dark expression on his face. It means that, a year from now, there will be maybe 600 humans left in the Dark City, and 2 years from now, there will only be a dozen or so. It takes a lot of people to maintain the semblance of a civilization we have going on here, Sonny. Once we pass the point of no return, it will all come crashing down. The beautiful archer glanced at him and added in a heavy tone, Every non-combatant will die. Every fighter who's not powerful enough will die. Eventually, only a few strongest ones will be left. Am I strong enough to be among those few? I'm not sure. And even if I am, who would want to live in a situation like that? He turned away and stared at Nephis, who was walking ahead of them. So, no, Sonny, I am not a convert. But I will follow Lady Nephis to the edges of the labyrinth and back, because it's better to die trying to do something than to live on hiding in your head in the sand. Don't you think? Just like that, their conversation ended. Sonny walked on in silence, thinking about what Kai had said. If the archer was right, then the future was, indeed, nothing short of disturbing. Of course, no one knew for sure how many sleepers were going to arrive here during the winter solstice, but now that he had thought about it, Sonny felt that the people who believed in the cyclic nature of the arrivals were almost right. He almost believed that there would not be hundreds of new faces arriving on the Forgotten Shore in 5 months. However, while others expected that there would be a few dozen after a year, and 100 after that, he did not. For some reason, Sonny felt that there won't be anyone else coming to the Dark City at all. He felt that the 3 of them, and Castor, were the last people to ever be sent to this hell by the spell. Gee, what's up with people today? First Effie and her doomsday talk, now this. I am already an extremely pessimistic person, and I don't need anyone's help to feel terrible about the future. But as it turned out, he did need help. These 2 conversations had opened Sonny's eyes to a serious problem. He was too short-sighted. He concentrated too much on the problems at hand and failed to see the bigger picture. Was it because both Effie and Kai had spent more time on the Forgotten Shore? Or was it because he had simply not paid enough attention to the details? Would things be different if he had? Just as Sonny glanced at Nephis, Cassie suddenly turned her head in his direction. Sonny frowned. What is it? She's been ignoring me this whole time, but now she wants to talk? Huh. The blind girl hesitated for a moment, and then quietly said, Something is following us. Chapter 191. Pursuer. Something is following us. Sonny's frown deepened. Not wasting any time, he moved forward and caught up to Nephis, Castor, and Effie. The huntress glanced at him and slightly tensed. Did your shadow notice an enemy? The shadow was currently a few 100 meters ahead of the cohort, scouting for any signs of danger. He shook his head. Cassie felt that we are being followed. I'm going to withdraw the shadow and send it back to take a look. Stay vigilant. Effie gave him a nod. Of course, as the pathfinder of the party, she was always vigilant. He was just warning her so that she could adjust her approach. The two of them were well accustomed to working together, so there was no need to waste words. Sunny commanded the shadow to return and fell back to the rear of the party. Once there, he concentrated on the shadows that surrounded them, trying to feel if there was something there that could not be seen. But there was nothing. Ahead of him, the rest of the cohort was silently preparing for the worst. Not wishing to let the unknown pursuer know that they were ready to act, no one summoned their weapons yet. No one had even turned their head. However, Sunny could see from the tension in their muscles that this peacefulness could explode into a storm of movement any moment. Changing Star and her hunting party did not earn their fearsome reputation by mistake. Finally, the shadow was back. Not letting it rest for even a second, Sunny immediately sent it to observe the streets they had just left. His perception was split between its vision and his own. The feeling of vulnerability he experienced when the shadow was away heightened. Sunny sighed with grim resignation. The fact that he was at the back of the cohort and, as such, would be attacked first if anything happened did not help one bit. "Calm down. You don't even know what is tracking the cohort." A few moments later, the shadow was safely hidden in the darkness of a ruined building, observing the crossroad that one would have to pass to follow them. Sunny continued walking, pretending to not know anything. A few seconds passed in tense silence. Then a few more. "Where are you? What are you?" Depending on the nature of the mysterious pursuer, their response would be different. If it was a nightmare creature, they would either have to fight it or try to throw it off their scent. However, if the creature turned out to be one of the truly horrifying existences that stalked the ancient ruins, then things would get really tricky. There was also another possibility, and that they were not being pursued by a monster, but by humans instead. A team of hunters might have been sent by Gunlow to ambush Changing Star and her people. If that was the case, honestly, Sunny didn't know what would happen. However, he was sure of their ability to withstand an attack from even the host, even if the enemy held a numerical advantage. The others seemed to share the same thought. After a few minutes passed, the shadow finally noticed movement. Someone was slowly walking in the middle of the street, not even trying to hide their presence. At first, Sunny thought it was one of the revenants that populated the dark city. The figure, while human in appearance, was strangely crooked, with a dark, unadorned cloak hiding its limbs and features. But then, Sunny suddenly felt cold fear grip his heart. He recognized those glassy, lifeless eyes, the hideous pale face that terrified so many people. Horace. It was Horace. The murderous butcher who had torn Jubei apart with his bare hands, Gunlow's cruel executioner and hidden blade. Walking through the cursed ruins with the same bored expression that he had in the grand hall of the Bright Castle on the day of Jubei's execution, Horace was following in their footsteps. Gunlow did not send dozens of hunters to ambush Changing Star. Instead, he sent just one man. Sunny shivered. "Damn it! Why? Why am I so afraid of that guy?" But he knew why. It was because, deep down, he felt that they were alike. Horace was the personification of everything that Sunny was afraid to become. Trying to shake off his fear, Sunny walked forward and glanced at Nephis. Then he said in a raspy voice, "It's that damn hunchback. He's following us." A sudden tension permeated the air. Without having to look, Sunny knew that everyone's faces grew dark. Horace was a mystery. No one knew what his aspect ability was, let alone his flaw. All that was known about this terrifying man was that he was very powerful, and that not a single victim of his had survived. Neff frowned. "Is he alone?" Sunny nodded. Yeah. To his right, Castor quietly scoffed. What is Gunlow thinking, sending one man against us 6? However, Neff did not share his disdain. Turning to her left, she glanced at Effie. There was a grim expression on her face. What do you think? The huntress hesitated for a few moments. Then, looking down from her considerable height, she simply said, I think we need to run. Castor scowled. Run? Why? Surely no matter how strong Horace is, we can take him down. None of us are weak either, even if we can't defeat him one-on-one. Effie shook her head. You don't get it, do you? We can't fight Horace. No one can. Many people have tried, and they're all dead now. She gritted her teeth. He is a monster in human flesh, Castor. He is insanely powerful. But that's not even the problem. The problem is that no one knows his aspect. All we know is that once Horace comes for you, you die. She sighed. I've seen many people try to resist once they've caught wind that Gunlow is going to send Horace to get rid of them. Strong people, weak people. Some tried to fight him alone. Others recruited fearsome allies. Come the next morning, all of them were dead. No matter how powerful they were or how many of them gathered to give him a fight, no one ever survived. All that was left was blood and corpses. Chapter 192 Lighthouse. As a somber silence settled among the cohort, Effie grimaced. The weirdest part is, no one has even seen him come and go. Every time Horace was sent into the outer settlement, we only learned that people were dead in the morning. Doors, locks, and barricades can't seem to stop him either. Once Horace is ordered to kill you, you just die. It is as though fate itself abandons you. Castor frowns. So, are you telling us that we stand no chance? The huntress shook her head. I'm saying that fighting him right now would be stupid. Not unless we learn how he is able to seemingly turn his victims, no matter how many of them that there are, completely powerless. With that, she glanced at Nephis, who lingered for a moment and then shook her head. Our friend in the castle doesn't know either. Effie grinned. Ah, so that mysterious friend of yours is not omniscient after all. Well, in that case, my advice stands. We should run. At that moment, Sunny finally spoke up. But, Effie, can we even run away from him? The smile disappeared from her face. Suddenly grim, she hesitated for a while, and then said, I know of a way, but it's going to be dangerous. Very dangerous. However, I don't know how else to shake him off our trail. So you decide, Princess. Neff was silent for a bit, and then simply nodded. We will face Horace some other day. Right now, reaching the resting place of the first cohort is our priority. The unruly huntress exhales, almost as if relieved. Then she said, Then follow me, and prepare yourself. After that disturbing discussion, Effie changed their course slightly. Instead of moving straight south, they were now traversing the ancient city heading for its eastern border. Sunny wasn't too familiar with this part of the ruins. During the past few months, he mostly stayed north of the Bright Castle, sometimes venturing northeast. He stayed away from the western areas because they were closer to the Crimson Spire, and had not explored much of the south because it was too far away from his cathedral. The last time he had been here was on the first day of the bloody fight against the Spire Messenger. Back then, they were headed for the ruins of the lighthouse that had once stood near the impregnable wall of the Dark City. Not that he had a lot of time to observe the surroundings. Pretty much all of his attention was concentrated on Horace, who was following them like a hound. He didn't like having to stare at the menacing hunchback at all. Why don't you go fight some fallen creature and die, bastard? However, Horace seemed to know the ruins just as well as Effie. He'd somehow avoided the worst creatures on his path while never losing the scent of the changing stars cohort. At one point, a lone blood fiend attacked him from the deep shadows of a dilapidated building. Gunlaug's executioner simply raised a hand and shattered the skull of the nightmare creature with one lazy punch. He didn't even blink. Big deal. I killed plenty of those too. However, Sonny had to admit that he was deeply unnerved by the power of the murderous hunchback. Maybe because he couldn't get rid of the feeling that, by the end of it all, only one of them would remain alive. And he wasn't sure which one. Soon they were nearing the tall expanse of the city wall. Not too far away, the remnant of a giant tower lay broken on its side, stretching far away into the distance. The buildings that the tower had fallen on thousands of years ago were shattered and turned into dust. The ancient lighthouse might have been proud and magnificent once. Perhaps it had even served as a symbol of the defiant will of the people of the ancient city, burning as a shining beacon in the eternal darkness of the cursed night. But it had fallen a long time ago, just like the people that built it. At least its ruin remained. The ancient inhabitants of the Dark City had just vanished, not even leaving bones behind. Sonny sighed. Where to now? Effie gestured at the massive ruin. Inside. They were currently hiding in a collapsed building near the collapsed tower. This area was populated by an especially vile tribe of monsters, and attracting their attention would spell trouble for the entire cohort. Call your shadow back and keep it close. When we enter the lighthouse, we will have to act quick. Somewhat relieved, Sonny did just that. Not having to look at Horace anymore was a reason for celebration. Staying low to the ground, the 6 of them dashed from their hiding spot to the broken lighthouse. Without wasting any time, they found a breach in its wall and climbed inside. Effie summoned her radiant memory, bathing the interior of the ruined tower in light. Due to the fact that it was currently lying on its side, they found themselves in a massive, echoing tunnel. Looking around, Effie found her bearings and led them deeper into the tunnel, extreme tension apparent in her every move. While walking, she began to speak. Listen to me very carefully and do as I say. Once we're inside, don't separate from the group. Stay together and keep your weapons at hand. The place we're going to is full of nightmare creatures. They're not too strong, but they're special. She bit her lip. Don't even try to kill them. Just defend yourself and keep moving. If you stop, you'll most probably die. The same thing if you slow down and get yourself surrounded. But if we can preserve our formation, we might survive. I hope. You hope? What do you mean you hope? Before Sonny could voice his outrage, they reached their destination. Right in front of him, the floor of the tunnel was broken, forming a narrow crevice. It was filled with darkness, leading deep down into the ground, and then deeper still. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't see what was at the bottom. The hunters glanced at him. What are you waiting for, doofus? Jump! Sonny gulped. You want me to jump? Into that? By his side, Kai sighed and looked down at his freshly cleaned, stylish armor. An expression of pure sadness appeared on his beautiful face. Oh well, here we go again. Chapter 193. The Catacombs. Without wasting any time, Nephis silently jumped into the crevice. Just before she did, white flames ignited in her eyes. The darkness swallowed her lithe figure whole, like the maw of some unknown creature. Damn it all. With a resentful expression on his face, Sonny stepped forward. However, before he could approach the crevice, Castor inadvertently blocked his path. A moment later, the proud legacy was gone too. Sonny lingered for a moment and then looked back. He wanted to check if Cassie needed help going down, but he didn't have to worry. Kai was already gently holding her in his arms. The charming archer softly rose into the air, hovered there for a second, and then glided into the darkness. Sunny blinked a couple of times and shook his head. Show off. Effie soon followed the rest of the party, taking her radiant memory with her. Left alone in the darkness, Sunny shivered, wrapped himself in the shadow, and jumped down. He fell for a few seconds and then landed on hard stone, the impact sending a painful tremor through his bones. Standing up, Sunny found himself in a narrow tunnel. Its walls were made out of weathered stone, clearly put there by human hands. The rest of the cohort was already there, preparing for battle. Nephis had summoned her silver longsword. Because the tunnel was not wide enough to freely use it, she was holding it with both hands. One armored gauntlet rested on the hilt, while the other was on the blade itself, halfway to the tip. Castor was wielding a sword too. However, his was a graceful jian, with beautiful patterns etched on its blade, with a triangular guard carved out of green jade. Sunny didn't know what the tier of that memory was, but he knew that it was extremely powerful. He had seen it cut through flesh, bone, and steel alike. Currently, the jian was emanating a ghostly green light. Effie had summoned her large round shield, but chose to leave the ancient bronze spear in the Soul Sea. While she was skilled enough to make use of it even in this narrow space, the shield would be much more formidable, especially considering her Herculean strength. Kai looked rather gloomy. Casting a mournful look over his shoulder, on the fletching of his heavy arrows, he sighed and outstretched his hand. Instead of a bow, an elegant falcata appeared in it. The beautiful curve of its blade glinted, reflecting the light. The last one to draw her weapon was Cassie. Unexpectedly, she unsheathed a slender rapier from the scabbard that was attached to her belt, and let go of it. To Sunny's surprise, the rapier did not fall to the ground, but rather stayed floating in the air, as if attached to the blind girl by an invisible string. Then it rotated slightly and hovered in front of her, with its tip pointing straight at Sunny. What? Cassie smiled and turned her head to him. Please forgive Quiet Dancer. She is shy around strangers. Sunny scratched the back of his head. Sensing his confusion, Cassie explained. Dancer is an echo and a partner of mine. We work well together. As if answering her words, the rapier suddenly circled around the blind girl and returned to her previous position. It was still pointing at Sunny in a rather unfriendly way, though. All right. Interrupting their conversation, Effie called out to him, Hey, Sunny, now would be the perfect time to invite your girlfriend to join us. The rest of the cohort stared at them with confused expressions. Sunny gritted his teeth. How many times do I have to tell you? She's not my girlfriend. Noticing the weird stares that people were giving him, he sighed, Effie, tell them! The huntress did not even continue to tease him. Just this fact alone told Sunny how dire their situation really was. Sunny also has an echo, and she's a powerful one at that. Go on, summon her. He did, and a moment later, the stone saint stepped into the tunnel out of his shadow. Her ruby eyes were burning with crimson flames from behind the visor of the helmet. The taciturn monster briefly glanced at the people gathered around it, and then indifferently turned away to peer into the darkness. Just like that, their group of 6 had turned into a group of 8. Well, if a moody flying rapier could be counted to be a member. Suddenly, a distant noise made everyone freeze for a moment. With a dark expression, Effie looked in the direction it came from and sighed. Right, we've wasted enough time already. Follow me. And be ready. With that, she took a step forward and headed deeper into the tunnel. Sunny followed, commanding the stone saint to stay close to Kai and Cassie. After a while, something crunched under his foot. Looking down, he saw a bone. A human bone. What is this place? The huntress glanced back, and then answered in a somber tone. The catacombs. He frowned. Since when are there catacombs beneath the Dark City? Why have I never heard you mention them? Effie lingered before answering. The catacombs were always here. They span beneath the whole city. It's just that most of the tunnels had collapsed a long time ago. As to why hunters don't like to mention them, it's because very few are crazy enough to explore what little remains of the catacombs, and even fewer return to tell the tale. Then she added, "No matter how powerful Horus is, a person can only survive here if they know their way around. And only a couple of us, outer settlement hunters, do. So we should be able to lose him." Meanwhile, Sunny noticed more and more bones littering the ground. All of them looked like they had once belonged to humans. "I don't like this." Looking up, he asked, "Can we get back to that thing you said about how very few people manage to escape from here alive? Why is that?" The huntress grimaced. "That's because—" However, before she was done speaking, something appeared out of the darkness and barred their way. Sunny opened his eyes wide. Right there in front of them, a corpse was standing on the edge between light and darkness, staring at the 6 humans with the black chasms of its empty eye sockets. No, not really a corpse. A skeleton. Defying all laws of logic and physics, a creature made of nothing but human bones suddenly lunged forth, baring its teeth in a hungry grin. Chapter 194. Aching Bones. How the hell is this thing even moving? Defying all logic, the skeleton lunged at Effie with the speed that even Sunny himself wasn't capable of. With no muscle tissue connecting the bones together, the strange creature was still able to stand upright, run, and attack with vicious strength. A moment before the undead monster closed the distance between them, Effie screamed, "Stay together!" Then she turned her torso and slammed her shield against the lunging monstrosity. With a thunderous crack, the skeleton was thrown back. Its skull and ribcage shattered, showering the tunnel with sharp bone splinters. Like a broken marionette, it fell to the ground in a shapeless pile. Sunny stared at the mess of broken bones in confusion. "Wait, that's it?" The huntress yelled, tearing him away from these thoughts. "Don't stop! Move!" The cohort rushed forward, following Effie into the depths of the catacombs. When Sunny was approaching the remains of the reanimated skeleton, he noticed something that made a cold chill run down his spine. The bones were still moving, slowly assembling themselves back into the shape that resembled a human. Just as he stepped past the creature, one skeletal hand suddenly thrust in his direction, trying to claw at his leg. If not for Sunny's quick reaction, it might have succeeded in injuring him. With one slash of the midnight shard, he crushed the clawing hand and threw it away. Falling on the stones a few meters back, the hand remained motionless for a moment, and then began crawling back to the quickly recovering skeleton. The monster was being rebuilt by some terrifying invisible force. Drawn by its unseen pull, the bones were putting themselves back together one after another. Those too damaged to be of use were simply replaced by one of the bones scattered on the floor of the tunnel. Soon the skeleton would inevitably rise again. A disturbing thought entered Sunny's mind. He finally realized why Effie had told them to keep moving instead of trying to kill the nightmare creatures populating the catacombs. Was it because these creatures were immortal? Or rather, undying? Sunny felt a sickening premonition that he was right. If so, things were going to turn from bad to harrowing pretty fast. It was at that moment that his ears caught a distant rustle coming from the darkness ahead of them. For a moment, he felt fear grip his heart, thinking that the dark sea had somehow found its way into the catacombs. But no, this wasn't the cursed sea. Instead, it was dozens, no, hundreds of skeletal feet scraping against the cold stones of the catacombs. Maybe even thousands of them. The hordes of undead monsters populating the catacombs were coming to rip the 6 humans apart. With a grimace of dark resentment on his face, Sunny gripped the midnight shard tighter and hurried after the other members of the cohort. Come and get it, bastards! Pretty soon, the undead creatures were upon them. First in ones and pairs, then in small groups, the bloodthirsty skeletons assaulted them in a constant stream. Appearing from the darkness of the catacombs, they lunged at the cohort in a whirlwind of bony claws and teeth, each bearing the same eerie skeletal grin. Effie and Nephis, who were at the front of the group, faced the brunt of the attacks. The huntress exerted her inhuman strength, bulldozing through the skeletons like an incarnation of ancient fury. Her round shield acted as a wrecking ball, shattering the undead monsters left and right. Nephis fought with the elegant fluidity of water, but also with the crushing force of a devastating flood. She was holding the longsword by the blade, using its crossguard and pommel as an improvised mace. With white flames dancing in her eyes, she moved from one skeleton to another, skillfully deflecting their blows and crushing one skull after another. Chapter 195. Rolling Battle. Once the cohort was surrounded from every side, Sunny, Cassie, and Kai had to join the battle in earnest. Sunny wasn't too worried for the blind girl and the archer because they were protected by both the Stone Saint and the Quiet Dancer. His shadow was possibly the worst enemy the bloodthirsty skeletons could face. Moving with the cold precision of an emotionless battle machine, she used both her sword and shield to deflect and destroy any enemy that dared to approach them from the sides. The graceful and devastating dance she was performing was a true sight to behold. The Quiet Dancer zipped through the air, supporting the shadow and covering any lapse left in the barrier of steel created by her. If something got past the two of them, Kai was there, using the curved blade of his falcata to crush the undead monsters, almost as if felling them with an axe. He was holding hands with Cassie, guiding the blind girl through the dark maze of the catacombs. However, it seemed as though her ability to orient herself in space had seen a considerable improvement in the past 3 months, perhaps due to the connection she shared with the flying rapier. She was now able to move quickly without using her wooden staff for support, at least. Looking at the two of them, Sunny grew somewhat sullen. Both Kai and Cassie were incredibly beautiful people, holding hands and surrounded by nothing but darkness and monsters, with the charming young man gripping an elegant sword. They looked like an image from a book cover. They looked perfect together. Sunny, on the other hand. Well, at least he had his shadow to keep him company, and the ordinary rock. However, he didn't have a lot of time to wallow in self-pity, because his was the second most important role in this furious moving battle, holding the rear of the cohort all by himself. Let me show you what I'm capable of. As more and more skeletons rose from the ground and attacked the party from behind, Sunny had to really exert himself. At first, he only had to fight one undead monster at a time. Despite their tremendous speed and strength, the skeletal creatures were not that hard to defeat. They seemed almost mindless, always attacking in the most straightforward way possible. Of course, a less prepared person would have been torn apart by these fierce creatures a long time ago. But Sunny was not the same weak and inexperienced kid he had been 7 months ago. The harrowing trials of the Forgotten Shore, as well as his tenacious will and grim resolve, had turned him into a fearsome creature too. In fact, in terms of pure viciousness, the skeletons had nothing on him at all. Wrapping the midnight shard into his shadow to slice through the tough bones of the undead monsters easier, Sunny employed every bit of battle prowess he had learned from his practice with the Stone Saint to destroy his enemies. Seamlessly weaving the firm and unassailable movements that he had learned from the taciturn stone creature into the flowing style taught to him by Nephis, he made short work of one skeleton after another. His blade sliced, slashed, and pierced through monster after monster, sending broken bones flying and cluttering to the ground. Of course, maintaining this state without falling behind the cohort was not easy. Sunny had never practiced fighting while on the run, especially not while moving backward. However, remembering Effie's words, he knew that being separated from the group and surrounded meant death, and thus made sure to never get too far away from his companions. At first, The situation was, if not easy, then at least within the scope of his capability. Sonny even thought that this was an excellent opportunity to put everything that he had learned in the past week to practice. Despite the fact that this battle was completely different from the way he had hunted monsters before, he was doing fine. Back on the streets of the Dark City, he hunted at night, always attacking the enemy from the shadows and aiming to finish the fight with one strike. The initiative was on his side, and so he was the one dictating the flow of the combat. However, right now, things were completely reversed. Sonny was the one being attacked, with enemies suddenly appearing from the darkness and instantly lunging at him. Put on the defensive, he had to react to the enemy's attacks as opposed to being the one attacking. And yet, he was managing. He had anticipated that a situation like that would inevitably happen and put enough flexibility into his technique to withstand any type of peril. He was, indeed, putting his lessons to practice, cementing them in his muscles and bones. After all, just like Nephthys had said, 1,000 hours of training was not as impactful as one real fight. But then, slowly, things began to change. After he had ruthlessly cut down a handful of undead abominations, suddenly 2 attacked him at the same time. Sonny cursed and ducked to the side, narrowly avoiding having his head crushed by one of the skeletons. His sword blocked the vicious strike from the other one, and, being pushed back a couple of steps by the force of the impact, he struggled to keep his balance. Not letting the monsters continue their assault unobstructed, Sonny dashed forward and twisted his body. Kicking one creature in the chest, he used it to propel himself toward the other one and put all that weight into a devastating downward slash. The skeleton crumbled into a pile of broken bones, and the edge of the midnight shard scraped against the stones, causing sparks to fly into the air. Knowing that his momentum was too strong to stop now, Sonny instead went with it, rolled over his shoulder, and got back to his feet just in time to meet the attack of the remaining monster face to face. His sword cut a sharp arc, severing both arms of the skeleton. Sonny instantly sidestepped the undead creature and delivered a low horizontal slash, breaking its legs. Making sure that the monster wouldn't be standing up anytime soon by piercing its skull with the tip of the midnight shard, he hurried to catch up with the cohort. Briefly glancing at the rest of his companions, he made sure that they were not dead yet and swiftly turned around, ready to face the next monster. Then his heart skipped a beat. Curses! 3 skeletons were rushing at him, menacing grins frozen on their skinless faces. Chapter 196. Divine Intervention. After that, things became hectic. Sonny had to push himself to the limit to fight against multiple opponents while maintaining the pace with the rest of the group. Knowing that slowing down meant death, he slashed, dodged, blocked, and moved back without allowing himself even a moment of respite. Slowly but surely, countless wounds began accumulating on his body. Even then, it wasn't enough. So he pushed himself past his limit. After all, this was the exact situation he had been preparing himself for by enduring the ruthless onslaught of the Stone Saint day after day. The inevitability of having to fight against an overwhelming force. Dark, vehement fury ignited in his chest, washing away pain and fear. Come and get me! I'm right here! Who did they think they were trying to kill? Noticing 4 new abominations answer his call, Sonny couldn't help but laugh. Good. Their assault came fast and without mercy, not leaving him any room for breath, but Sonny welcomed it. Dodging one of the skeletons, he dashed forward and positioned himself behind another one so that its body blocked the path of the third. He couldn't do anything about the 4th one for the moment, but its attack was accounted for. It was going to hurt like hell, but not to the point of killing him. Bloodweave was going to take care of the rest. The midnight shard cut through the air and severed the undead creature's knee, causing it to clumsily fall to the ground. At the same time, cold fingers tore into Sunny's side. He had already shifted his body to make sure that they were not going to damage any vital organs. With Puppeteer's shroud taking most of the damage, Sunny only ended up receiving 5 deep scratches, which then instantly welled with blood. Ah, crap, that hurts. But he didn't regret it. The only thing he regretted was the fact that, with the shadow wrapped around the midnight shard, he couldn't observe its movement during this long and arduous fight. Just imagining the kind of insight he could have gleaned from it filled him with avarice. Turning around and reversing his grip on the sword, Sunny commanded the shadow to move onto his body. Almost instantly he felt a rush of power fill his muscles. In the same fluid movement, Sunny took a step forward toward the monster that had just wounded him and delivered a crushing blow with the pommel of the tachi. The skeleton's jaw flew away in a rain of broken teeth. Taking another quick step, Sunny circled around the disoriented creature, hooked his hand around its damaged skull, and tore it clean off the spine. Then he pushed the decapitated creature into the 2 remaining ones, briefly slowing down their approach. By the time the undead abominations regained their balance, Sunny was already upon them. The midnight shard flashed 3 times, turning the 3 skeletons into 3 piles of bones. Taking a step back, he narrowly avoided the claws of the last remaining skeleton, the one whose legs he had chopped off at the start of the skirmish. Sunny glanced at the creature that was madly crawling toward him and finished it off with one powerful thrust. Then he groaned. Ah, crap. I think I overdid it. Sunny was bruised, hurting all over and covered in blood. What's worse, he was exhausted. This moving battle was too intense and had lasted for too long. Even with his endurance enhanced by the bloodweave, he was nearing the point where his performance would start dropping rapidly. Once that happened, he would die, because the damn undead creatures were not only immortal, but also tireless. Just as this thought appeared in Sunny's mind, a new wave of skeletons lunged at him from the depths of the tunnel. Tiredly raising his sword, he gritted his teeth. Time for Plan B. At some point, the tunnel they were currently in was briefly drowned in a brilliant wave of pure white light. Glancing over his shoulder, Sunny noticed that Nephis had finally summoned her flames, channeling them into the blade of her sword, just like on the day they had fought against the Carapace demon. Faced with the blinding radiance of the incandescent blade, the skeletons almost seemed to melt. Perfect timing! Using the momentary disorientation of his own opponents, Sunny dashed back and commanded the stone saint to switch places with him. As they passed each other, he sent the shadow from his own body onto that of the taciturn stone knight. Almost immediately, the shadow saint's eyes blazed with menacing carmine fire. Her skin shone with dark radiance, and wisps of ghostly gray fog appeared from beneath her stone-like armor like dancing flames. The impenetrable darkness of the catacombs suddenly seemed to become even deeper, embracing her like a vast black mantle. Yeah, I have some tricks up my sleeve too. A second later, the shadow crashed into the undead creatures, sending splinters of bones and severed limbs flying through the air. She proceeded to massacre them, moving from one to another in a graceful storm of darkness and destruction. Taking her place near Kai and Cassie, Sunny was finally able to rest for a few seconds. His battered body was screaming with pain, and the gray fabric of the puppeteer's shroud had turned heavy with blood. With 2 wielders of divine aspects activating their hidden cards almost simultaneously, the cohort got a chance to catch their breaths for a few short moments. However, it was clear that this calm wouldn't last long. Sunny didn't really want to show all of his cards yet, but the situation left him little choice. He doubted he could continue this mad dash for much longer. Plus, chances were that the rest of the party, preoccupied as they were with their own share of the undead monsters, would either fail to notice the sudden alteration happening to the stone saint, or assume that it was just an ability of hers. Using the opportunity, Sunny took a look at the condition of his companions. It was not good. Changing Star's armor was battered and torn, with blood seeping down her right side. Effie's shield looked like it was on the verge of coming apart, while her white chitin was painted red. Castor managed to preserve some semblance of a collected look. However, there was a deep gash under one of his eyes, his face bloodied and grim. Kai was not doing much better. He was pale and visibly exhausted, his auburn hair disheveled and soaked with sweat. Sonny didn't even want to think about his own sorry appearance. Only Cassie, whose Tier 6 armor made her less likely to be attacked by an enemy, looked more or less fine. However, her flying rapier had several visible nicks on its slender blade and looked tired and dispirited overall, as much as a flying weapon could look like anything. In short, one thing was painfully apparent from their state. If things didn't change soon, all of them were going to die. Skillfully using his sword to cut down a skeleton that had suddenly lunged at him from a side passage, Sonny strained his lungs and shouted, "Hey, Effie! How far are we from the exit of this damned place? When is this going to end?" Swatting away an undead monster of her own, the huntress briefly glanced back and grinned. "What do you mean, end? What does she think? What do I mean? Isn't it obvious?" Turning back to concentrate on the horde of the enemies in front of them, Effie yelled, "What end? This was just the warm-up!" Chapter 197 Ultimate Test. Sonny cursed and prepared himself for the worst. A few moments later, the short respite they had gotten was over. With a sound that reminded him of rushing water, a terrifying wave of undead monsters crashed into their formation, threatening to break it apart. Effie braced for the impact and withstood the furious onslaught, somehow managing to split the wave in two. From one side, Changing Star dove into the torrent of skeletal wraiths, her incandescent sword cutting through them like a ray of pure sunlight, piercing the darkness. From the other, Castor's enchanted blade was doing the same. The scion of the Han Li clan moved with astonishing speed, turning into a blurry whirlwind of ghostly green steel. Everything that it touched turned to dust. Sonny glanced at Kai and said in a hoarse voice, "Prepare yourself." In the next moment, the wave of monsters was upon them. Left without the comforting protection of his shadow, Sonny could only rely on his own ability, cunning, and technique. Dashing forward, he clashed with the first skeleton. His sword flashed through the air with lightning speed, and the headless corpse instantly fell to his feet, blindly clawing at the stones in front of it. Sonny had never fought like this. From the first day on the Forgotten Shore, he always had something helping him resist the horrors of the Dream Realm, be it his shadow, cover of darkness, Changing Star, or the Stone Saint. Now, he had to face the torrent of nightmare creatures with nothing but his own frail human body. And resolve. This was the ultimate test of pure skill. Gritting his teeth, Sonny tried to remember the feeling of clarity he had experienced after the Carapace Centurion had crushed his ribcage with one strike of its terrifying bone scythe. All unnecessary thoughts were obliterated by his will, leaving only two. Kill your enemy. Prevent the enemy from killing you. Using this clarity, he entered the state of flow. His perception expanded, absorbing every detail and aspect of what was happening in the dark tunnel. His thinking accelerated, turning the mayhem that surrounded them into a stark and streamlined pattern of cause and effect. Connected to the underlying law of it all, Sonny was able to react to the actions of his enemies faster and predict them better. Shim! With a hissing sound, the midnight shard cut the air and slashed the next monster across the chest, splitting the skeleton diagonally in two. Without paying the defeated creature any attention, Sonny instantly lunged at the next one. His movements were fluid and unpredictable, but also grounded and firm. Every strike, every step was calculated and efficient, focused on delivering the maximum amount of damage while preserving as much of his strength as possible. It was a perfect combination of the two seemingly contradictory battle styles that he had learned. Just like that, Sonny danced between the countless undead monsters, his sword cutting one after another down. The midnight shard wasn't unimaginably sharp like Castor's Gian, nor filled with annihilating white flame like Neth's radiant longsword. However, it refused to give in and remained unbroken. No matter how many tough bones the Tachi cut, not a single dent appeared on its blade. With blood streaming down his body and sweat biting his eyes, his muscles on the verge of breaking apart and his lungs desperately burning for air, Sonny somehow kept up this mad tempo and fought. At some point, he heard a furious roar from somewhere ahead and briefly looked up, noticing that Effie had dismissed her battered round shield and finally summoned the beautiful bronze spear. With it in her hands, the huntress became even more deadly. Multiple skeletons burst into a shower of broken bones, cut apart by a wide arc of the ancient weapon. However, at the same time, more and more wounds started accumulating on Effie's body. Despite everything, things weren't going well for the cohort. Or at least, it seemed that way for a while. At some point, however, Sonny noticed that the number of skeletons attacking the cohort from the front had begun to diminish. Pretty soon, Nephis, Effie, and Castor were getting a few moments to catch their breaths from time to time. The pressure on himself had also lessened. The Stone Saint, on the other hand, was to hold off an ever-increasing number of undead creatures attacking the party from the rear. When the balance of the rolling battle noticeably shifted, Changing Star gave a command to change the formation of the cohort. She quickly dashed back to reinforce the taciturn shadow, while Sonny moved forward to support Castor and Effie at the head of the group. Once he got there, the huntress gave him a tired smile. "Hey, doofus. You look like shit." Sonny glanced down and had to agree with her. With his armor torn in a dozen places and soaked through and through with blood, he looked pretty much exactly as dead as the nightmare creatures they were fighting. However, Effie's state wasn't much better. He smiled crookedly. "Thanks. You're quite a looker yourself, you know." The huntress scoffed and then turned away to face another of the undead abominations. "Hold fast. We're almost there." She told the truth. After several more minutes of furious fighting, the tunnel they were moving through suddenly opened into a vast, large cavern. A few meters in front of them, the floor of the catacombs was broken, collapsing into a vast, seemingly bottomless chasm. That terrifying abyss was filled with darkness that even Sonny's sight couldn't pierce. The chasm was no less than 40 meters across and stretched far into the distance both left and right, like a dark border separating the world of the living from the world of the dead. A rickety rope bridge was drawn across it, connecting to a similar-looking tunnel at the other end of the abyssal chasm. The rope bridge looked like a derelict of ancient times. It was flimsy, slippery, and rotten through and through. "She doesn't expect us to actually use it, does she? It's so obvious that this thing will collapse as soon as we step on it. Has she not seen any Saiguk? Even if others somehow survive, there's no way that I, with that damn fated attribute, will make it to the other end." Sonny turned to Effie and scowled, really hoping to be surprised by her answer. "So, what now?" The huntress looked at him in confusion. "What else? We crossed the bridge!" Chapter 198. Last Stand. Sonny sighed. Of course, they had to cross the bridge. Why had he even bothered to ask? Great. At least the damn thing was empty of skeletons. The path to the other side of the chasm was clear. What is clear is that I'm going to die. While Sonny was consumed by these unhappy ruminations, Effie and Castor quickly threw the few undead creatures remaining in the front of them over the edge of the chasm. Finally, safe from their constant attacks, most of the cohort took a chance to quickly catch their breaths. Only Nephis and the Stone Saint were still fighting. In fact, the overwhelming pressure of the pursuing horde had grown so heavy that they were barely holding on. Two figures, one shrouded in shadows, the other bathed in pure white light, were slowly buckling under the furious onslaught of the army of the dead. Sonny gritted his teeth. If nothing changed, they were going to be the ones being thrown into the dark abyss very soon. With a grim expression on his face, he glanced at Effie and said, "Go." Leaning on her spear, the huntress weakly shook her head. "Someone will have to hold them off long enough for everyone to get to the other side. You should—" Sonny interrupted her. "I'll be the last one to cross. Don't worry. I have a plan." A crazy plan, but what else was new? Giving him a long look, Effie hesitated for a few seconds, then nodded. "All right. Stay alive, Sonny." He quietly chuckled. I didn't know you cared." She stared at him for a bit, and then calmly said, "Nah, it's just that if you die, pretty soon I'll have to fight your scrawny corpse, so don't do that, okay?" With that, Effie beckoned others to follow her and stepped on the rickety bridge. Sonny blinked a couple of times, watched her go, then turned his back to the chasm and sighed. Right, what else did I expect? In any case, there was no way back now. Brandishing the midnight shard, he dashed forward and joined Changing Star and the Shadow Saint in their desperate fight. Dispatching a couple of skeletons, Sonny briefly turned to Nephis and said, "Retreat to the bridge. Saint and I will hold them off." Her eyes shone with white flames through the visor of the Starlight Legion armor's helmet. A moment later, he heard her hoarse voice. "Are you sure?" He dodged the claws of an especially menacing monster, bashed it away with the pommel of the Tachi, and yelled, "Yes, but—" Another undead creature fell to the midnight shard. "When you get to the other side, you need to destroy the support of the bridge. Do you understand?" Changing Star hesitated, almost missing the timing of her attack. Then she asked, "What about you?" Sonny laughed. "Don't worry about it. I have a way to get across." Neff didn't answer for a while. Finally, she simply said, "All right." Not one to waste words, Changing Star didn't say anything else. When the opportunity presented itself, she silently retreated, letting Sonny take her place. Now, for the hardest part. With Nephis gone, all the monsters of the catacombs descended upon the Stone Saint and him. Sonny cursed, feeling that the tiniest mistake would spell his doom. The onslaught of the undead horde was beyond anything he had experienced. Desperately trying not to drown in the torrent of ferocious abominations, Sonny fought with everything he had left. Damn it all. How the hell was she able to hold this position for so long? Not prone to heroic displays, Sonny used the shadow as a meat shield. Stone shield? And hid behind her from time to time, emerging from the cover of the taciturn monster only to deliver a strike or two and disappear again. The two of them worked beautifully together, almost as if sharing one mind. Well, what did he expect? She was his shadow after all, and his shadow was currently wrapped around her stone body. The armor of the menacing knight was still mostly intact. However, even it was battered and broken in several places. With a dark expression on his face, Sonny noticed a stream of ruby dust pouring from one of the breaches. The Stone Saint was wounded. This needs to end fast. Feeling his own endurance running out, Sonny wanted nothing more than to fall to the ground and rest, even if it meant dying. But instead, he doubled the intensity of his attacks. There was no need to hold anything back and preserve his strength anymore. He just had to last for a bit more. A dozen seconds at most. But even a dozen seconds seemed like an impossible dream. Impossible. He knew someone who was in the habit of making impossible things happen. With a furious growl, Sonny cut another skeleton apart, received a glancing blow to his already wounded side, and stumbled back. The shadow appeared in front of him, enduring a rain of attacks with the help of her already battered shield. Her feet slid on the stones, but the taciturn knight stubbornly held. God damn it, when? As if answering his silent cry, a loud rattle followed by a thunderous boom informed him that the bridge had already been brought down. Now there was nothing connecting the two sides of the terrifying chasm. Sunny was left alone against the horde of immortal monsters, with no way to retreat. Finally! Turning his back to the undead creatures, Sunny peered into the darkness. Seeing the cohort waiting for him on the other side of the dark abyss, he lingered for a moment, sighed, and ran to its edge. The shadow slipped from the body of the stone saint and wrapped itself around his own. Suddenly weakened, the taciturn monster held the entire horde back by herself for a split second, and then dissolved into darkness, returning to the tranquil expanse of the Soul Sea. With no obstacles to slow them down anymore, the flood of skeletons lunged forward. They were just a meter or two behind Sunny, stretching their deadly claws to tear him apart. Too close! Approaching the abyssal chasm, Sunny briefly glanced into the impenetrable darkness that filled it, and, without pausing even for a second, jumped off the ledge. Chapter 199. Cliffhanger. Crap! Jumping into the bottomless, dark abyss, Sunny briefly regretted every decision he had ever made in his life. How did he end up in this situation? Where did he go wrong? However, there was no time for self-reflection. He wasn't ready to see his whole life flash before his eyes yet. There were more pressing matters. Before the momentum of his jump waned, Sunny summoned the Prowling Thorn. By the time the triangular dagger materialized in his hand, he was already beginning to fall. Not wasting any time, Sunny threw it with as much power as he could while simultaneously sending the shadow from his hand onto the blade of the kunai. The throwing dagger flashed in the darkness of the underground cavern, streaked the wide chasm, and embedded itself into the hard rock of the other side of it. Because of the enhancement of the shadow, it got deeply lodged in the stone. Yes! A moment later, the invisible string connecting the Prowling Thorn to Sunny's wrist drew tight. Instantly, his hand was violently jerked forward, holding on for his dear life. Sunny swung through the darkness with incredible speed. Behind him, dozens of skeletons plummeted into the chasm, with more being pushed down with each second. However, he was already far away. Ha! Bite it, you bastards! A couple of seconds later, all humor was smashed out of him by the hard impact against the opposite wall of the crevice. Sunny tried to soften the blow a little, but it still hurt like crazy. His bones groaned, on the verge of breaking apart. A couple of them probably did. Sunny blacked out for a moment or two. When he came back to his senses, his wrist was in agony, with the invisible string of the Prowling Thorn slowly cutting deep into his skin. Hissing, Sunny gripped the thin string with his other hand and relieved a part of the pressure. Then he looked up. 10 or so meters above him, 5 pale faces hovered above the edge of the cliff. On them were written expressions of horror, shock, and astonishment. Oh, right. I guess they don't know about this memory of mine. To his cohort, his desperate trick must have looked like simple suicide. From the perspective of people who didn't know about the secret enhancement of the Prowling Thorn, Sunny just took a running start and jumped into the abyss, only to disappear into its darkness without a trace. It was as though he had chosen to sacrifice his life to give the others a chance to escape, like some sort of stupid hero would. Do they even know me? Like I'd ever do something like that. Swinging on the invisible string, Sunny strained his aching chest and yelled, "Hey, idiots! I'm down here!" Slowly, 4 of the 5 faces turned to look straight down. Their expressions were rather comical. Cassie simply tilted her head, but her expression was priceless as well. Grinning, Sunny began to climb up. Since the string of the Prowling Thorn could change its length at will, he commanded it to shorten and rode comfortably all the way up, stepping lightly on the vertical wall of the chasm from time to time to make the process faster. Soon he climbed over the edge of the cliff and sprawled on the cold ground, breathing heavily. The rest of the cohort just stared at him. "What?" Effie was the first to speak. Glad you're alive, Sonny, but also, what the hell? How did you do that?" He simply threw her the kunai. Once the huntress bent down to pick it up, Sonny pulled on the invisible string and made the dagger fly back into his hand. "Oh, that was a piece of cake. Nothing that a knife and a piece of string can solve. More or less." He decided to admit the fact that he had almost soiled his pants in the few short moments between jumping off the edge of the chasm and successfully embedding the prowling thorn into the rocks on the other side of it. Effie blinked a couple of times, then slowly straightened herself up. "Cool memory. Where'd you get it?" Sonny dismissed the kunai and entirely waved his hands. "You know those porcupine monsters back in the city? I got it off of one of those." With that, the others left him alone. They were all hurt and dead tired, too. Everyone needed to rest and patch up their wounds. Nephis made a move to try and heal them, but was stopped by Effie. The huntress darkly shook her head. "Not yet. There's one last hurdle to overcome. We'll need you to be at the top of your game." Changing Star glanced at her, lingered for a few moments, but then sat back down. Out here, the word of the Pathfinder was the law. If Effie said that Nephis needed to save her strength, then she had to obey. Sonny was too exhausted to care. He knew that he was not going to bleed out thanks to the blood weave, and that was enough for now. He just wanted to rest. Some time later, he heard a shuffling sound, and looked up to see Kai sitting down near him. The charming archer looked way too pretty and put together for a person who had just lived through the same mayhem as them, but Sonny was starting to suspect that this infuriating trait was just something he would have to come to terms with. Maybe Kai had some weird attribute that made him look good no matter the circumstance. Looking at the beautiful young man, Sonny sighed and said, "Hey, Knight, how are you doing?" Kai scratched the back of his head and answered, All right, I guess. That was intense back there, huh?" Sonny nodded. "Yeah, so, what's up?" The charming archer hesitated for a bit. "Nothing, really. I just wanted to say 3 things to you." What a strange guy. "Oh, all right, go on." Kai looked at him thoughtfully and said, "Well, first of all, I now fully understand what you meant when you said that you were crazy. Because that jump of yours, that was really crazy." Sonny chuckled. "I guess so. I'm alive, though, aren't I?" The archer gave him a nod and smiled. "Another thing I wanted to say is that I also understood how you managed to survive all those months in the ruins. Your swordsmanship, I've never seen anything like it. I think that very few people in the Dark City would survive a clash against you, so everything makes more sense now." Sonny didn't know how to feel about that praise. On one hand, it was nice to be acknowledged for something he worked so hard on. On the other hand, he still preferred being considered a cowardly weakling. It made killing fools far easier. He shrugged. "Thanks, I guess. What is the third thing?" Kai was silent for a long time, as though trying to find the right words. Finally, he shook his head and cautiously said, Right. About that jump of yours. You do remember that I can fly, right? So I could have carried you over the chasm, no problem. So, why did you do it?" Sonny stared at him silently for a while, an inexorable expression on his face. God damn it. To be honest, in the chaos of it all, he did forget about this crucial detail. After a long stretch of awkward silence, Sonny opened his mouth and said in a flat tone, "Oh, you know, it just seemed like a good idea at the moment." Kai blinked and gave him a strange look. good idea? Sonny cleared his throat, then stared at the charming young man. It worked, didn't it? So, let's not talk about this again. Ever. Okay? Chapter 200. Descent. After a while, Sonny regained enough of his senses to warily look around. The tunnel they were currently in was somewhat different from those they had traversed while fighting the horde of undead monsters. It looked more weathered and decrepit, with its walls and floor smoothed and uneven, as though eroded by something over the course of countless years. What's worse, it was wet. With a cold shiver, Sonny realized that they were surrounded by puddles of black water. The smell of sea salt permeated the air. Looking up, he found the tall figure of the boisterous huntress and asked in a raspy voice, "Where are we?" Effie glanced up at him and gestured up. 100 meters or so below the surface, pretty much exactly under the city wall. He stared at her blankly, slowly comprehending the meaning of these words. The huntress gave him a nod. "Yeah, you guessed correctly. Come night, this place is going to be full of seawater. That chasm behind us is what prevents the catacombs from being flooded by the dark sea." She sighed tiredly. "So, unless we want to drown or be eaten by some depth dweller, we need to get out of here as soon as possible." Sonny closed his eyes, imagining a roaring torrent of black water erupting from the mouths of countless tunnels and falling into the abyssal chasm like waterfalls made of pure darkness. Yeah, if they were still underground when that happened, sea monsters would be the least of their problems. The sea itself would kill them. Luckily, the day was still young. Effie's words served as a signal. A few moments later, Nephis rose to her feet and glanced at the members of the cohort. Her pale face was calm and composed. "Time to go. Gather your strength." With sighs and groans of pain, everyone stood up. Sonny was the last one to follow suit. "Ouch, that hurts. I'm really starting to wonder if fighting Horus was a better choice." But no, it wasn't. Terrible as it might have been, the battle with the skeletons was at least predictable. The damned hunchback, on the other hand, was a complete unknown. There was nothing worse than facing an enemy that you knew nothing about. As the cohort headed deeper into the tunnel, Sonny caught up with Effie and asked with a hint of idle curiosity in his voice, "By the way, how do you even know your way around the catacombs?" It wasn't like she could have leisurely explored these deadly tunnels alone. The huntress gave him a dubious look and shrugged. "This knowledge is sort of passed down between the outer settlement hunters. I've been here a couple of times before, trying to escape from especially terrible nightmare creatures. Although, to be honest, I only descended this deep into the catacombs once." Effie shivered. "I was new in the Dark City at that time. Back then, the strongest hunter in the outer settlement sort of took me under her wing. We went down here with an entire party." Sonny scratched the back of his head and grimaced when his battered body protested against the sudden movement. "Yeah? And that party must have been very strong to return from this place alive." The huntress glanced at him and smiled darkly. "Who said anything about returning alive? Actually, they all died. I was the only one to survive." Sonny stared at her for a long time, and then asked, "If they all died, then why the hell did you bring us here?" Effie shrugged. "Because no matter how strong that party was, they weren't even close to this one. Do you even realize how powerful the 6 of us are, all put together? God damn, I wouldn't want to be our enemy." Then she hesitated for a few moments and added, "Plus, this time, I know what we're going to face. We'll get out of here in one piece, trust me." Sonny wasn't a particularly trusting person, but at this point, he didn't really have a choice. Leaving the tall huntress alone, he walked in silence for a while. The tunnels were now strongly angled down. With each minute, the cohort was descending deeper and deeper underground. Slowly, his curiosity awakened. Now that the harrowing battle against the army of the dead was behind them, Sonny began to wonder about something peculiar. Where exactly did all those human skeletons come from? There were hundreds, if not thousands of them down here in the catacombs. Even if every hunter that had ever lived in the outer settlement died in these tunnels, their number wouldn't account for that much. Not to mention that people who perished in the Dark City ended up eaten by some terrible monster, their bones pulverized into dust by its teeth. His pointless pondering was interrupted by Effie, who suddenly gestured for the cohort to stop. After discussing something with Nephis, she gave her a nod and turned to the rest of them. Listen up. We're close to the central chamber of this maze. The exit to the surface is right ahead. However, getting to it won't be easy. The tall huntress hesitated, and then added, If we want to make it outside, we will have to act fast. There's a big fat bastard of a nightmare creature that lives in that chamber. However, it takes time for it to fully wake up. So don't stop to look at it. Don't panic. Don't lose your cool. It might look scary, but if you follow Neff and do what she tells you to do, you should be alright. She waited for a bit to make sure that everyone understood her meaning, and then grinned. Alright, if everyone is ready, let's go meet the Lord of the Dead. What? Lord of the Dead? Not liking the sound of this name one bit, Sonny summoned the Midnight Shard and reluctantly followed after Effie. Soon they entered a giant underground chamber. Once Sonny saw what was inside of it, his eyes grew wide. He finally understood where all those skeletal wraiths came from. He also understood where the inhabitants of the ancient city had disappeared to. They were all here. Chapter 201 Lord of the Dead. The giant underground chamber was circular in shape, and as immense as the grand hall of the Bright Castle. Its walls were built out of the same gray stone slabs as the mighty walls of the Dark City. But unlike them, the walls of the chamber were covered with whispering streams of cold, nebulous black water. In the center of it, a vast mountain of human bones rose from the ground, reaching almost halfway to the distant ceiling. Hundreds of thousands of people must have perished to create it. With a harrowing realization, Sonny finally understood where the people who built the ancient city and the impregnable wall surrounding it had disappeared to. They were all here, piled onto each other in this vile monument of death. This horrid dark chamber was their final resting place. An old memory suddenly surfaced in his mind. Back beneath the branches of the soul tree, Cassie had seen a vision of a blood-soaked hill formed from countless corpses. On top of it, a tiny black seed was floating in a pool of blood. Was there a similar mountain of bones hiding under the soil of the Ashen Barrow? Was that how the Soul Devourer had been born? Sonny shifted his gaze, only now noticing the veins of crimson coral growing from the harrowing hill of white bones, almost like muscle tissue of some colossal creature. Following the coral pillars up, he finally saw that the dome of the immense chamber was broken, with pale sunlight streaming through the breach and falling on the ghastly visage below. A giant stone hand was reaching down through the broken dome, its palm open, as though trying to caress the mountain formed from the bones of those people who had once populated this dark, forsaken land. Looking at the stone hand, Sonny suddenly realized where they were. The vast underground chamber was situated directly underneath the headless statue of the graceful woman who had saved them from drowning in the black waters of the cursed sea. One of her hands was raised towards the heavens, as if trying to embrace them. The other had broken off and fell thousands of years ago, lying in the mud at the base of the giant statue, reaching into the depths of hell. That was the hand Sunny was looking at right now. It was also their way out of here. "Doofus, wake up!" Brought back to reality by Effie's yell, he shuddered and looked around with a new understanding. So, the exit the hunters had told them about was the breach in the dome of the underground chamber. With Kai's aspect ability and the help of the golden rope, escaping through it was not going to be a problem. But where was this Lord of the Dead she had mentioned? From Effie's colorful description, Sunny had expected to see a giant monster slumbering in the heart of the catacombs. If memory served right, her exact words were, "a big fat bastard of a nightmare creature." But he couldn't see anything. Unless... His eyes narrowed. And just at that moment, the mountain of bones suddenly moved. When the mountain moved, everything suddenly made sense. At first, Sunny thought that the unknown creature was sleeping inside the ghastly hill of bones. But then he realized that no, it wasn't. The mountain itself was the nightmare creature. This was the Lord of the Dead. Each of the countless bones piled on top of each other in the underground chamber was a part of its body. For a moment, Sunny was paralyzed by fear. "Fat bastard? This is what you call a fat bastard?" But then the disparate pieces of information clicked in his mind, assembling into a vivid chain of cause and effect. Of course. Why didn't I realize sooner? The mountain of bones, the horde of immortal skeletons, the Lord of the Dead. It all connected. The nightmare creature in front of him was a fallen tyrant. Tyrants were the fifth step in the evolution of nightmare creatures, and the name of that class was not coincidental. The fifth step represented rule and authority. That's why the blind monstrosity he had faced on the slopes of the Black Mountain was named a king, and that's why the abomination in front of him was named a lord. Classes differed from each other in terms of pure might, but most of the distinction between them was caused by a more fundamental reason. Higher classes possessed characteristics that, while not directly affecting the quantity of their power, gave it a qualitative change. For example, while beasts were mindless, demons and those above them were intelligent. That's why a demon, even if it was only slightly stronger than a monster, was in fact 10 times more dangerous. The characteristic of the tyrant class was that these nightmare creatures were capable of creating and controlling large amounts of lesser creatures. The Mountain King's larva that Sunny had slain during his first trial, which was born when a tiny worm living inside the Mountain King's body entered the corpse of a dying slave, was one such lesser creature. Though, this power had its limitations. The minions created by a tyrant couldn't be of the same rank as it. That's why the larva was a dormant beast, while the Mountain King itself was an awakened. Similarly, while the skeletons that the cohort had faced were awakened, they had to be created by a fallen tyrant. And something told Sunny that their immortality was tied to the Lord of the Dead too. If someone wanted to destroy the undead army, they would have to destroy the abominable bone colossus first. Said colossus, meanwhile, was slowly waking up right in front of Sunny, and if when it did... Damnation! Nervously gripping the midnight shard, he glanced at Nephis. The golden rope was already in her hands, and she was passing it to Kai. Before the beautiful archer could take it, though, the mountainous creature suddenly rippled. A moment later, a twisted pillar of bones shot from its body, flying in their direction with the force of a siege ram. Chapter 202 Risk and Reward. Nephis and Kai dove away, and the massive pillar of bone shot past them. Before the thunderous sound of it crashing against the wall of the chamber even reached Sunny's ears, The pillar was already moving, whipping sideways with tremendous force. Luckily, he and Cassie were behind it, but Effie and Castor were not. Both of them reacted with admirable speed and fell to the ground, allowing the terrifying limb of the gargantuan creature to fly above their heads. Rising from the stone floor, the hunter screamed, "It's just thrashing in its sleep. Move! We need to get out of here before the bastard wakes up." Cursing, Sonny dismissed the midnight shard and faced the mountain of bones, trying to predict its next move. He was beginning to understand how Effie's original hunting party had perished in the catacombs. A sword wouldn't be of any use in this situation. The Lord of the Dead was slowly coming to its senses. The bones constituting its repulsive body moved and rippled, unfurling from within the white mass like giant twisting limbs. It seemed to be slowly turning from a shapeless hill into some semblance of a creature. What shape that creature would assume once it fully awoke, Sonny didn't want to know. Another twisting limb, suddenly shot from the mass of bones, blindly striking at the empty space behind the giant abomination. Sonny gritted his teeth, his ears ringing from the thunderclap of its impact against the wall. What followed was a deafening noise of thousands of ancient bones scraping against the weathered stone. The massive pillar whipped left and right, then fell to the ground and slowly retreated back inside the body of the Lord of the Dead. Meanwhile, Nephis was back at her feet. Dashing toward Kai, she pushed one end of the golden rope into his hands and pointed to the breach in the dome of the chamber. In the next moment, the archer soared into the air, flying to his destination with incredible speed. With a terrifying scraping sound, the whole white mountain rippled once again, and several devastating pillars of bone shot to intercept him. However, Sonny had no time to check on Kai, because the Lord of the Dead had extended 2 more limbs in his direction. Diving under the first one, Sonny felt a wave of fetid air rush past him. Knowing that he only had a second left to live, he then strained his muscles and jumped with all his shadow-augmented might. Sonny's body flew several meters into the air, avoiding the rushing bone tentacle only by a few centimeters. Landing in a roll, Sonny cursed and got back up to his feet. "What kind of infernal jumping rope game is this?" The Lord of the Dead was slowly coming to its senses. More bone tentacles appeared from the mass of corpses, each moving with growing precision. But Kai was already standing on the palm of the giant stone hand, the golden rope looped around one of its fingers. Cassie was the first one to climb up. With the flying rapier loyally hovering over her shoulder, the blind girl effortlessly moved up the rope, reaching the distant ceiling of the underground chamber less than 10 seconds later. It was easy to forget that she had absorbed as much soul essence as the rest of them. Her delicate arms hid much more power than one would assume. However, back on the ground, those seconds were a real hell. The mountainous creature was waking up, making it hard for the rest of them to stay away from its blindingly thrashing limbs. They needed to get out of here fast. Effie was the next one to take the rope. The huntress practically flew up, pushing herself with agility and Herculean strength worthy of an ancient hero. Then it was Castor's turn. Effortlessly dodging a pillar of bone with his incredible speed, the legacy grabbed the rope, and then turned into a barely visible blur. A second later, he was already landing on the giant stone palm. Nephis and Sonny were the only ones left in the reach of the fallen tyrant. Glancing at Sonny, Changing Star yelled, "Your turn!" However, Sonny did not respond. His eyes were fixed on the base of the gargantuan abomination, where, amidst the ancient bones, a weak golden glow emanated from a small, partially concealed object. Sonny lingered for a moment, his thoughts moving with incredible speed. He knew that he was a greedy person by nature, and one cursed with insatiable curiosity too. However, first and foremost, he was a person who put a tremendous amount of value on his own survival. That's why, right now, his reasoning was cold and sober. It was a question of risk and reward, as well as his ability. Would he be able to reach the object shining with the light of divinity and come back alive, or not? A second later, he looked at Nephis and answered, "You go, I'll be just behind you." It would be a shame to go through all of this and not receive anything in return. He had to try. With that, Sonny turned around and dashed toward the Lord of the Dead. The decision was made, and now all that was left was to execute it. Summoning the prowling thorn, he threw it at the mountain of bones. Of course, Sonny didn't hope to wound the tyrant. He just wanted to lodge the kunai in its body. Just as the throwing dagger pierced the mass of bones, a white limb suddenly shot in his direction, obstructing everything with its repulsive expanse. Commanding the invisible string to contract, Sonny jumped high into the air and flew forward as though launched from a cannon. Landing on the other side of the pillar, just a few steps away from the unencompassable mass of bones, he gritted his teeth, and then thrust his hand inside the fallen tyrant's body. A moment later, his fist closed around the concealed object, and, with some effort, Sonny pulled it out in the clatter of breaking bones. A sharp pain pierced his forearm. Opening his fist, he saw a small, intricate iron key. It looked almost ordinary, if not for the ethereal golden glow emanating from within it. In the next moment, Sonny suddenly staggered, feeling a wave of weakness washed over his body. Rotating his forearm, he stared blankly at it for a split second, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. And when he did, his eyes widened in terror. Chapter 203 Corpse Eater. Glistening in the dim twilight of the underground chamber, an enormous leech was attached to his forearm. The creature was about 1 meter long, its slimy skin slightly translucent and red as dried blood. It was indescribably repulsive. What's worse, though, was that its sucker had effortlessly broken through the leather vambrace of the puppeteer's shroud and sunk deep into Sonny's arm, splitting open his skin and muscles. Currently, the leech was gorging on his blood, its belly slowly ballooning as crimson fluid rushed into it with frightening speed. With a sense of disgust and horror, Sonny slammed his fist into the spongy flesh of the revolting monster. Augmented with the power of shadows, his punch was powerful enough to easily break a human skull. The abhorrent slug, however, did not even react to it. It just continued sucking out his blood. All Sonny achieved was sending a wave of pain rolling through his body. Not good. Instantly summoning the Midnight Shard, he enhanced its edge with the help of the shadow and hacked at the leech, putting all his strength in behind the strike. The blade of the Tachi was as sharp as a razor, and with the augmentation provided by shadow, it slid helplessly off the leech's skin, not leaving even a scratch on it. The slug wasn't affected at all. It was still drinking his blood, consuming a dangerous amount of it with each second. Sonny stared at the disgusting creature, dumbfounded. His body was already starting to suffer from blood loss, a sickening weakness slowly spreading through it. There wasn't much time left it would cause him to lose consciousness, and then inevitably die. Think. The leech had broken through his Tier 5 awakened armor without any effort. It was immune to the damage done by the Midnight Shard, which had never failed to cut down any monster he faced before. This could only mean one thing. The damn slug was a fallen beast. Sonny blinked in disbelief. That thing is a fallen one? Are you kidding me? If this was true, then nothing he could do would harm the leech. Maybe, if he was at the very peak of his rank, there would be a chance. But with his core mostly empty and his aspect ability focused on versatility as opposed to pure might, like Effie's, There was none. The gap between their ranks was just too wide. Stone Saint could probably wound it, but it would take several seconds for the taciturn monster to appear and take action, seconds that Sunny didn't have. By the time she was able to do anything, he would already be dead, either sucked dry by the abominable slug or crushed to death by the Lord of the Dead. That left Sunny with only one option. If he couldn't get rid of the leech, he was going to have to cut off his arm. Maybe Nephis would be able to grow him a new one. Or not. In any case, he had to do it in order to survive. Raising the Tachi over his head, Sunny gritted his teeth and hesitated for a moment. Despite understanding that this was the only way, he was struggling with the idea of crippling himself so terribly. Don't think. If you want to live, just do it. With a desperate resolve, he forcefully brought the midnight shard down, but then stopped it at the last second. The sharp blade hovered mere centimeters away from his skin. This was not due to the lack of determination, but because Sunny noticed a subtle change happening to the leech. Its belly, which had been expanding rapidly as his blood filled it, stopped ballooning at some point. Now, strange spasms were running through it. What the? In the next moment, the vile creature suddenly convulsed. Letting go of his arm, it dropped to the ground and writhed in agony. Through the translucent film of its skin, Sunny could see the innards of the giant slug bursting open. It was as though it was being torn from within by some invisible force. No, not a force. It was being killed by his blood. The damn leech got poisoned by it. It seemed that bloodweave was far more odd and tenacious of an attribute than he had thought. A second later, the whole body of the fallen beast simply ruptured, spilling blood everywhere. Sunny stared at it with a blank expression. Bringing him out of the daze, the voice of the spell whispered, "You have slain a fallen beast, corpse eater. Your shadow grows stronger. Huh. You have received a memory." As his eyes grew wide, Sunny shook off his astonishment and lunged forward. He still had to escape from this damn place. Grabbing the bloodied soul shard from the eviscerated remains of the abominable leech, he turned around and sprinted to the golden rope. Dodging a bone tentacle that burst from the body of the gargantuan tyrant to pursue him, Sunny rolled on the ground, jumped over a pile of broken bones, and finally reached his destination. As soon as he grabbed the rope, it began contracting, bringing him out of the underground chamber. When Sunny was nearly reaching the hand of the stone goddess, a deafening roar thundered from below, washing over his body in an almost palpable wave. The Lord of the Dead was finally awake. But it was already too late. His prey had escaped. Climbing out of the mud, Sunny fell to his knees, and then tiredly lowered himself to the ground. The breath was escaping from his lungs with laborious, raspy sounds. Weak. He felt so weak and tired. But it was so good to see the sun again. The wounds he had received in the catacombs had finally caught up with Sunny. With adrenaline gone, he was now in a sea of pain. A quiet groan escaped from his lips. That was not fun. While Sunny was contemplating this, a shadow fell over him. Looking up, he saw Nephis glaring at him with a dark expression. She was bloodied and battered, with a deep frown contorting the graceful lines of her usually calm face. "What?" Kneeling beside Sunny, Changing Star grimaced and said, "Are you insane? Why did you do that?" He tried to chuckle, but ended up twisting in an excruciating coughing fit. When Sunny was finally able to breathe again, he said weakly, "Yes? No? Maybe. I don't know. I just saw something shiny." With that, he opened his fist and showed Changing Star the glowing crystal of the ascended soul shard he had scavenged from the corpse of the vile blood-sucking leech. She stared at it for a few moments and then sighed. Without saying anything else, Nephis placed her cool hands on his chest and closed her eyes. A moment later, the purifying white flame spread through his body like a warm embrace, repairing any damage done to it. Even knowing how much pain this cost her, Sunny couldn't help but be happy to feel its touch again. Soon his pain disappeared. When his head cleared of the fog, he realized that they had done it. They had successfully escaped the Dark City. Who knew it would be so hard? Chapter 204 Mysterious Key. A while later, they were resting in the shadow of the giant statue. Every member of the cohort looked nothing short of terrible. However, beneath the bloodied clothes and broken armor, their bodies were whole and sound. Changing Star had healed them all. And now, she was the only one who was weak and exhausted. Using the white flame so much had taken a heavy toll on her. Sitting in the mud, Sunny raised his head and looked at the giant statue of the faceless woman. She was just like the last time he had seen her, slender and graceful, with her light flowing robe rippling in the wind, as though it was made out of actual fabric and not hard stone. The statue was tilted slightly to the side, with its one remaining hand reaching high into the sky. A long time ago, on the night of their harrowing escape from the Ashen Barrow, Sunny, Cassie, and Nephis had taken shelter in her palm. It was from its height that he had first seen the walls of the Dark City. Looking down, Sunny stared at the other hand of the giant statue, which had broken off a long time ago and fell down, crushing through the dome of the underground chamber. With a sigh, he closed his eyes and thought, "Thank you for saving us again." Then his face darkened. Remembering the events that had transpired in the catacombs, Sunny felt his good mood evaporating. Although he had found the answer to one of the mysteries that had been plaguing him for a while now, he wasn't happy about it. The fate of the inhabitants of the ancient city had always been something that Sunny was very curious about. As an amateur explorer who spent most of his free time studying the ruins of the Dark City, he was familiar with subtle details of their culture more than most. Learning about the mundane facts of their lives was somewhat of a passion of his. He had known that the history of this ancient civilization ended in tragedy, of course. A cataclysmic disaster had destroyed it, turning the once prosperous land into the desolate hell it was today. But against all logic, Sunny still had hope that these people had somehow managed to survive. Perhaps they had migrated somewhere, leaving the ruins of their city behind. But now he knew that it wasn't so. All of them were right there below him, buried forever in a damp underground chamber, piled onto each other high enough to form a ghastly mountain of bones. More than that, their remains had been soaked in the cursed waters of the Dark Sea and turned into a vessel for the soul of a vile nightmare creature. There were a lot of questions about the fate of these people still lingering in his mind. How did they end up in that dark chamber? Had they died there, or had their bodies been brought there by someone, or something, later? How was the Lord of the Dead born? Was its inception the same as that of the Soul Devourer? But he didn't really want to know the answers anymore. He felt that learning them would only break his heart. With a sigh, Sunny decided to distract himself from these depressing thoughts with something uplifting and summon the runes. One cluster in particular interested him the most. Shadow fragments, 322 of 1,000. He had received 4 fragments for killing the corpse eater. Even though the manner of its death was rather peculiar, having now killed nightmare creatures of the awakened, fallen, and great ranks, Sunny could surmise that his initial theory was right. The spell gave him double the fragments for killing enemies of higher ranks, according to the number of soul cores they possessed. An awakened creature would lend him 2 fragments for each core, a fallen 4, and a great one 16. It was easy to guess that killing a dormant creature, which was equal to him in terms of rank, would result in 1 fragment per core, while killing a corrupted one would result in 8. Made sense. It was the same as absorbing soul shards, with the difference being that shadow fragments entered his core at the moment of the kill and without making a distinction between nightmare creatures and humans. Looking up, he glanced at the list of his memories. Memories. Silver Bell. Puppeteer Shroud. Midnight Shard. Ordinary Rock. Prowling Thorn. Endless Spring. Blood Arrow. The last one was new. Slightly intrigued, Sunny read its description. Memory, Blood Arrow. Memory rank, Ascended. Memory tier, 1. Memory type, Weapon. Memory description. A debt of blood must be paid in blood. Memory enchantments. Rain of Blood. Restitution. Enchantment description. The arrows are created from the wielder's blood, and as such can rain on the enemies for as long as the archer has any left in their veins. Enchantment description. If the arrow finds its mark, it will drink the blood of the prey and restore that which has been taken from the archer. If it misses, the archer's blood will be lost forever. Huh, creepy. Since Sunny didn't know how to use a bow, this memory was useless to him, which was a real shame, because it was the first ascended one he had ever received. Memories of that rank were extremely rare on the Forgotten Shore. He could either feed it to the Stone Saint for a couple of shadow fragments, or... Sunny glanced at Kai and frowned, lost in thought. While the blood arrow was of no use to him, it would be a real boon for the charming archer. With it at his disposal, he wouldn't have to carry a quiver with him, not to mention that each shot he made would be much more devastating. As long as Kai didn't miss, of course. If he did miss, he would be sacrificing his blood for nothing. Transferring the blood arrow to Kai would have made the cohort much stronger, but Sunny wasn't sure that he was ready to give up his first and only ascended memory. Not for free, at least. Torn, he dismissed the runes and decided to think about it later. In other news, the Bloodweave had revealed a new trait. Turns out, Sunny's blood was poisonous. Or, rather, damaging to anyone who ingested it. At least it seemed that way from the manner of Corpse Eater's death. He would have to experiment to find out more later. Or not. Sunny honestly didn't even know how one would go about checking something like that, and wasn't particularly eager to find out. After dismissing the runes, Sunny finally decided to take a look at the mysterious key. Subtly glancing around, he furtively took it out from beneath the vambrace of the puppeteer's shroud, where he had it hidden earlier. The intricate iron key lay on his palm, glowing with a pale golden light. The light of divinity. Sunny had no idea what the key was supposed to open. He had taken an insane risk and almost died to get it. Was it worth it? Honestly, he wasn't sure. But deep down, Sunny felt that it was. For some reason, he sensed that the small iron key would turn out to be extremely important to him. Chapter 205. Journey to the South. Sadly, the cohort did not get a lot of time to rest. Despite the fact that it wasn't even noon yet, they had a lot of ground to cover before sunset. The plan they had made at the start of the day was to leave the Dark City from the south by climbing the wall near the grandiose main gates and then travel through the labyrinth to the next safe height, which was about 10 kilometers away. However, due to the fact that they had ended up in the catacombs instead and had to escape through the chamber belonging to the Lord of the Dead, the party was now east of the ruins, near the beautiful statue of the Faceless Woman. Not only did they have to circle around the city now, but there was also less time to reach safety before the flood of darkness devoured the Forgotten Shore once again. Standing up in a chorus of disappointed groans, the cohort assumed the marching formation and set out south. Walking through the mud of the colossal crater was not easy, but for the time being, they had no other choice. Unless they wanted to scale the monumental stone wall and return to the Dark City, of course. Luckily, with both Sunny's shadow and Kai scouting the way ahead, they didn't have to worry about being ambushed by monsters. So, for the time being, the only thing the party had to struggle with was moving their feet through the wet dirt. The monotonous silence was broken only by laborious breathing and slurping of mud. A while later, the impregnable and seemingly endless gray wall that loomed some distance away and above them slowly twisted, drifting away from the edge of the crater. They were finally leaving the cursed ruins behind. Turning around, Sunny looked back and studied the site of the city that had been his whole world for these past 4, almost 5 months. Far away, the floor of the gargantuan crater sharply rose, forming a tall slope. On it stood the unassailable wall of polished gray stone, firm and unyielding despite the thousands of years that had passed since the demise of its creators. From where he stood, Sunny could see the flood of crimson coral swelling at its base, sharp blades powerlessly scraping against the cold stone in hopeless attempts to find purchase. It looked as though the city was being besieged by the land itself. If it knew what awaits inside, the labyrinth would be trying to escape as far away as possible from that damned place instead. With a sigh, Sunny looked up and noticed a lone human figure standing on the wall, watching them disappear into the distance. That figure was crooked and dark, emanating a cold feeling of foreboding. A few moments later, it turned away and disappeared from view. Horace had chosen to return to the bright castle. Trying not to shiver, Sunny lingered for a few seconds, and then hurried up to catch with the group. They were safe from him, at least. For now. Because the crater was too big, the bend of its edge was almost imperceptible. Only by looking far into the distance could one say that it was actually curved. Because of this, the cohort could have continued traveling through the crater for a long time without having to move farther away from the goal of today's journey, which lay to the southwest of their current position. However, they had to leave the crater and return to the labyrinth sooner or later, not only to escape the black water, but also because there was nothing to hide behind on this vast muddy plain. If any flying nightmare creature decided to attack them from above, the cohort would have no defense against it. The labyrinth, well, hiding its own fair share of terrifying threats, at least offered some measure of protection. That's why, at some point, Nephis led the party to the sharp slope of the crater, and the 6 of them climbed out of it. With the help of Kai and the trusty golden rope, the task wasn't hard at all. For some time after that, they walked on the ridge separating the crater from the labyrinth proper, but then, finally, had to turn west and enter the maze of crimson coral. Sunny couldn't help but sigh once the familiar coral wall surrounded him once again. He didn't miss the first months of his infernal voyage into the dream realm at all. Well, maybe a little, but not because of the damn labyrinth itself, that's for sure. The Crimson Forest was simultaneously the same and vastly different from the region of it that he had traveled through before. The coral maze itself was pretty much identical to how it had been east of the gargantuan crater. However, the creatures populating it in these parts were vastly different. There were no members of the Carapace Legion around, at least not anywhere Sunny could see. Instead, the dominant tribe of nightmare creatures in this region seemed to consist of nasty spider-like critters that had a habit of decorating the walls and passages of the labyrinth with endless amounts of gray, incredibly sticky cobwebs. What's worse, their webs seemed to be made not out of spider silk, but out of thin metal wires that were tough as iron and could cut the victim into little pieces if it thrashed too much after getting caught. Needless to say, getting yourself stuck in these webs was tantamount to a death sentence. The deeper into the labyrinth they went, the more of these cobwebs surrounded them. It came to the point where they had to use Cassie's flying rapier to clear the path ahead every few minutes, slowing down the speed of the cohort to a crawl. During one of these stops, Sonny rubbed his face and thought, I just hope that nothing attacks us while we wait. Turning to him, the shadow glared for a few moments and then tiredly shook its head. It then placed one palm across its face and looked down, as if defeated. What? What did I say? A moment later, several massive spider-like creatures jumped out of the cracks in the coral and attacked them. Chapter 206 Triumph. The spiders were about the size of a human, incredibly fast, and had plates of something that resembled iron covering parts of their repulsive bodies. They looked like armored battle machines created for the sole purpose of slaughtering living things. They also looked strangely familiar. With a little effort, Sonny realized that these abominations looked a lot like lesser, much smaller versions of the giant fallen beasts that had destroyed the original Stone Saint and her kin. It's just that their size and armor weren't nearly as formidable. If so, I have bad news for you fools. As soon as the spiders attacked, the members of their cohort reacted with the deadly calmness of experienced Dark City hunters. Weapons flash in the air, severing limbs and piercing through iron as though it was paper. Effie straight up flattened one of the creatures with a devastating strike of her battered shield. The poor beast didn't even have time to understand what a huge mistake it had made. The others were no less efficient. Sonny himself threw the prowling thorn and pulled on the invisible string as soon as it sunk into the flesh of one of the spiders, bringing its jump to an abrupt end and sending it crashing to the ground. Before the beast could stand up, Quiet Dancer streaked through the air and pierced its head clean through. Just a few short seconds after the spiders had tried to ambush the group of humans, the battle was over. 3 dead nightmare creatures were sprawled in the mud, while the 4th one ended up pinned to a coral wall with several arrows. They could have even shaved a second or two if it weren't for the need to look out for the spider webs. Sonny shook his head. Disappointing. Wait, why was he disappointed? Great! This was great! Not every victory had to almost cost him his life. If there was one thing to feel disappointed about, it was that this one was so swift that he had not even gotten the chance to finish any of the enemies himself, thus not receiving any reward from the spell. But even then, he would be glad to only fight easy battles like this in the future. Nephis cleaned the blade of her sword with a piece of cloth, listened to the silence for a few moments to make sure that nothing else was going to attack them, and then gave the cohort a go-ahead to start dressing the monsters down. Soon, soul shards, strips of meat, and other useful parts were cut, cleaned, and put into Effie's enchanted bag. Everything was done with efficient speed and professionalism that could only come from a lot of experience. Sonny could only shake his head again. They were able to dispose of the iron spiders with such ease because of 2 reasons. First, as far as nightmare creatures went, these ones were not on the same level as, for example, carapace scavengers. They had a slight advantage in speed, but were not nearly as strong, agile, or ridiculously tough. If Sonny could guess, he would say that the iron spiders relied heavily on their webs and battlefield advantage to defeat their prey. Because the cohort had destroyed the webs in advance, their main advantage was gone. The second reason was the cohort itself. They were some of the deadliest humans on the Forgotten Shore. Sonny was sure that at least 4 of them could kill a pathfinder of the host in single combat, if not one of the lieutenants themselves. They were the best and the brightest the outer settlement could offer, after all. Effie had been right when she said that there had never been such a powerful cohort outside the walls of the Bright Castle before. All in all, the 6 of them were more than equipped to handle just 3 awakened beasts. The labyrinth was going to really try harder if it wished to see them dead. Sonny chuckled. Just 3 awakened beasts. Yeah, how crazy did that sound? And yet it was true. Finishing up with the dead spiders, the cohort indifferently left their eviscerated bodies behind and continued on their way. After several more minor skirmishes with the iron spiders, they had finally reached their destination. Not too far away from them, colored pink by the evening sun, a magnificent arch of white marble rose high above the sea of crimson coral. The giant structure was clearly created by the same people who had built the bright castle and made from the same stone. It looked like a much larger sibling of the pristine arch that guarded the entrance to the white road which climbed all the way to the outer settlement. Only this one was much more weathered, bleak, and damaged. Signs of corrosion and deep cracks covered its surface, with one of its sides being partially collapsed. Sunny studied the arch and looked at Nephis. "This is our stop for the night?" She gave him a simple nod and said after a short pause, "We need to pick up the pace. The night is close, and we might have to fight to clear the top of it." Sunny sighed. Fighting again. When would they finally be able to rest? It had been such a long day. However, he kept his mouth shut. Changing Star was the most tired out of all of them, due to healing all of their wounds no less, and he didn't see her complaining. So it wasn't his place. To his left, Effie suddenly cursed and groaned. "More fighting? Come on! When are we finally going to eat?" Sunny blinked. "Well, that works too, I guess." Staring at the huntress, Nephis shook her head and silently walked forward. Soon, they reached the giant arch. Kai summoned his bow and flew up, only to return a few minutes later and report that no terrible monster was nesting on top of the ancient structure. With sighs of relief, the members of the cohort climbed the golden rope one after another and were soon standing far above the labyrinth, silently watching as the flood of black water drowned it in the lightless depths. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, they were left on a rectangular island made out of white marble. All around it, there was nothing but the undulating waves of the dark sea. Sunny was once again surrounded from all sides by nothing but darkness and black water. He did not like the feeling. Chapter 207 Beach Episode. The night passed with no incidents. In the morning, Sunny was woken up by the sound of the surging waves and opened his eyes to see the sun slowly rising from beyond the horizon. Rubbing his face, he sat up and looked around, noticing that most of the cohort was still asleep. Only Kai, who had been the last one to stand watch, was awake, sitting on the edge of the arch and admiring the dawn with a dreamy look on his face. Sunny wanted to call out to him and warn the charming archer not to sit this close to the edge, but then remembered that Kai could fly. Yeah, like I would forget it again. Using the opportunity, he dove into the soul sea and summoned the stone saint from the depths of the shadow core, where she was sleeping in the embrace of nurturing black flames. Just like before, the shadow did not appear from a sphere of light like an echo would, but stepped out from a whirlpool of dark fire. Then she stood motionlessly in front of Sunny like an actual statue, seemingly indifferent both to his presence and the wounds covering her body. Sunny walked around the stone saint, studying the extent of damage done to her by the undead horde. The armor of the taciturn knight was battered and broken, pierced in several places by the claws of the countless skeletons she had fought. The ruby dust wasn't flowing from the breaches anymore, but he could still see deep gashes on her smooth gray skin. Bastards! Who dares to hurt his shadow? Shaking his head, Sunny dismissed the saint, sending her back into the restorative darkness of the shadow core. The damage, while extensive, was not really threatening to her existence. In a couple of days, his pet monster should fully recover. In fact, she already looked better than she had yesterday. Leaving the soul sea, Sunny inhaled the fresh air, lingered for a few moments, and then turned to Kai. "Hey, Knight, are you stupid? Don't sit this close to the edge." The charming archer looked at him and raised an eyebrow. "I can fly, remember? If I fall—" Sunny scoffed. "I'm not worried about you falling into the cursed sea. I'm worried about something dragging you off into it, and that'd be terrible, right?" Quite happy with himself, he grinned and turned away. "What a nice way to start the day," Because everyone needed some time to rest and recuperate, they decided to spend a day on the Marble Arch and continue their journey tomorrow. As the result, Sonny was currently staring at the sight that wasn't really funny but filled him with mirth nevertheless. Back in the real world, when he had time to consume some entertainment, Sonny had noticed a certain popular trope. In most dramas, webtoons, and cartoons aimed at young boys and teenagers, the heroes would inevitably end up spending a day at the beach during their adventures. He didn't know why such a trope existed, but suspected that it was just an excuse to show the female characters in nothing but revealing swimsuits. Not that he had anything against it. In any case, Sonny had never imagined that he was going to end up in such an episode himself one day. This is simply hilarious. Barely holding himself from laughing out loud, Sonny glanced at his companions. Because everyone's armor and weapons were damaged during the battle in the catacombs, they had to keep these memories inside the Soul Sea for a bit of time to allow them to restore themselves, just like the Stone Saint was currently doing in the depths of his shadow core. As the result, all of them, including Sonny himself, were currently wearing nothing except for some loincloths and, in the case of the girls, makeshift brassieres. Provided these crude undergarments weren't really swimsuits, and the Marble Arch could barely be considered a beach even at night. But still, the situation was funnily similar. They were all half naked and relaxing in the middle of a something that someone could call an adventure, so it was close enough. Ha! He was in a rather good mood. Everyone was busy doing their thing. There was a fire in the middle of the arch, with roasting meat filling the air with an appetizing aroma. Effie was tending to it. The tan and lean body of the muscular huntress looked like it was cut from stone, as if she was a sculpture of an ancient goddess come to life. Sonny tried to count her abs and got distracted halfway through by, not so stone-like parts of her robust figure. After a couple of seconds of thoughtless bliss, Sonny had to hurriedly look away. The last thing he wanted was pure thoughts. Nethys was helping Effie with the breakfast. Next to the vigorous huntress, her figure seemed especially slender and lithe. However, she was also extremely athletic in appearance. Her ivory skin was pleasantly contrasted against the olive skin of their boisterous pathfinder. What a sight to behold! From a purely aesthetic standpoint, of course. Seeing Changing Star like that reminded Sonny of the early days of their stay in the Dream Realm. Things had been much simpler back then. Suddenly wistful, he looked away and checked what Cassie was doing. The blind girl was resting near the fire, wrapped in her beautiful cloak. With her delicate features and small stature, she looked extremely lovely. And then there were Kai and Castor. Sonny sighed and looked down at his own scrawny body. Honestly, after all these months spent hunting monsters, eating meat, and absorbing shadow fragments, he looked much better than he used to. In fact, by human standards, he was nothing short of, well, above average. Even as far as Awakened went, he could probably compete with some in the looks department. But these two specimens were simply on another level. Kai was tall and shaped like a young god, with lean muscles rolling under his flawless skin and a svelte figure that begged to be sculpted into a marble masterpiece. Sonny could swear that even sunlight was attracted to him, illuminating the charming archer in just a way to make him look as gorgeous as possible. Currently, Kai was tending to his arrows, somehow managing to make even that simple task look glamorous. Castor was much the same, with a perfect body and broad shoulders that simply screamed of power, appeal, and potency. With a darker skin to match his gallant and manly image, he was basically the epitome of masculinity. This was contrasted by a handsome but gentle face and humorous green eyes, creating a rather tempting visage. Sonny grimaced and turned away. You know what? To hell with this beach day nonsense. Let's do something productive. Chapter 208. Something Productive. Walking over to Kai, Sonny cleared his throat and forced himself to not cover his eyes. The damn archer was just too dazzling. Him being shirtless in crowded places should have honestly been categorized as a public hazard back in the real world. If not, there was a gross oversight. I wonder how he was made. Probably in a secret government laboratory or a magic cauldron of some sort. I mean, there's no way this dude is the same species as me, right? After a few seconds of Sunny blankly staring at him, Kai smiled politely. Sunny, did you want something? Sunny flinched and covered his eyes. Don't smile at me! Kai blinked. All right. Breathing heavily, Sunny glared at him and slowly lowered his hand. That's better. And yes, I did want something. Kai suddenly livened up and pointed at his chest. What is that, an accessory? What is he... Lowering his gaze, Sunny noticed the mysterious key hanging on a thread tied around his neck. He didn't really want to show it to anyone, but with the puppeteer's shroud restoring itself in the Soul Sea, there were not a lot of places where he could hide it. None that he was willing to use, at least. Plus, no one else was supposed to be able to see the light of divinity, so to them, it just looked like a small iron key. Sunny frowned. It's not an accessory, it's a key. Kai hesitated. Oh, what does it open? Sunny shrugged. How should I know? The charming archer seemed a little confused. But if it's not an accessory, and it doesn't open anything, why are you carrying it around? His questions were starting to get tiresome. Sunny sighed. To open something, of course. Kai scratched his nose. But you just said that you don't know what it opens. Sunny gritted his teeth. It's a damn key, right? So it has to open something. I just carry it around in case I find something that can be opened by the damn key. What's so hard to understand? The beautiful archer gave him a strange look. Oh, I see. That definitely makes sense. Curses. That's not how I plan to approach him. Sunny instantly changed his expression and looked at Kai with a wide smile. The sudden shift looked sort of creepy. What I wanted to say, Knight, my dear friend, we are friends, right? Anyway, what I wanted to say was that I hope that this answer satisfies your curiosity. That's something a friend would say, right? The charming young man gave him a dubious look. I guess? Sunny made his smile wider, feeling his face hurt a little. Great! So we are friends. Well, some might say that it's your lucky day, buddy, because today, and only today probably, Sunny's gorgeous emporium offers customers an exclusive friendship deal, just for friends of the establishment. Aren't you lucky? Kai suddenly coughed. Wasn't it Sunny's brilliant emporium last time? Sunny blinked. Was it? Well, it doesn't matter. The deal still stands. Are you interested or not? The archer lingered for a few moments, and then cautiously said, But, Sunny, you still haven't told me exactly what that deal entails. Is it a deal for customers you consider friends, or are you trying to sell me your friendship? Or, wait, do you want to buy mine? Or both? I'm confused. As if waiting for that response, Sunny nodded energetically. Yes, I'm glad you asked. In fact, I have an incredible item that I want to sell. It's so incredible that I am even reluctant to part with it. But since you are my friend, I am willing to give it away. Practically for free. Full friendship discount, just for you. No need to thank me, really. Attracted by the noise, the other left what they were doing and were now staring at the two of them. Effie got distracted from preparing meat and was now observing the circus with an expectant grin. Realizing that he is now the center of attention, Kai sighed. All right, I'll bite. What is that incredible memory you want to sell me? Sunny remained silent for a few moments, and then suddenly stopped smiling. Oh, just something I had gathering dust in my soul, see? It's a memory that can serve as an endless supply of arrows, as long as you don't miss. The beautiful archer's eyes suddenly lit up. He glanced at his quiver and said, Wait, really? You really have such a memory? After thinking about it for a long time, Sunny had decided to give the blood arrow to Kai. Having the archer of their cohort armed with it would make a lot of things easier during this journey. He could potentially earn himself a bow in the future and learn how to use it, but it wouldn't be anytime soon. Plus, with how dangerous the enchantments of the blood arrow were, nothing short of excellence would fly. And excellence took a lot of time to achieve, time that he didn't have. So, giving it to a skilled archer like Kai was a better decision. Their recent encounters with the iron spiders only made Sunny more certain that this was the right thing to do. But he wasn't going to give it away for free. Yes, I do have a memory. Then he casually added, "Oh, did I forget to say, it can provide an endless supply of arrows, and also all of those arrows will be of the ascended rank." A grave silence settled over the marble arch. You're in possession of an ascended memory?" That question was asked by Castor. Kai didn't have to ask because he already knew that Sunny was telling the truth. His eyes slightly widened. On the Forgotten Shore, ascended memories were exceedingly rare, for an obvious reason. Sleepers could only get one by defeating a fallen nightmare creature, and there weren't a lot of people capable of such a feat. Added to that was the fact that not every kill provided a memory. In fact, most didn't. To receive one was the dream of every inhabitant of the Dark City. Sunny shrugged. "Oh, I have a couple. Why?" The other being the onyx armor, which was broken and useless, but they didn't need to know that, honestly. He grinned. "Only the best wares in Sunny's astonishing emporium." Wait, was it astonishing? Who cares? You get the sentiment. Castor shook his head. "How did you get an ascended memory? You!" The grin froze on Sunny's face. When he spoke a few moments later, all humor was gone from his voice, replaced by coldness. "Well, if you have to know, I got it by killing a fallen beast. Before you ask, this time I didn't have to shake my finger or spit. I just looked at it, and it died." Then he turned his head and looked straight at Castor. "I am very proficient in killing things, you know." Chapter 209 Fireside Banter. In the end, Kai agreed to his deal. In exchange for the blood arrow, he gave Sunny 3 memories, the 2 weaker arrows he had, and a small charm capable of producing fire. Sunny fed all 3 to the Stone Saint, bringing her amount of shadow fragments to 31. That was 4 more than she had in the past, which meant that he received the same amount of fragments that he would have gotten by feeding her the blood arrow itself. He didn't really gain anything, but also didn't lose anything. Kai was the one who really profited from their exchange. So Sunny didn't lie when he said that it was an incredible deal. After breakfast, which transpired in somewhat awkward silence, Sunny sprawled on the ground and smiled happily. "You know, guys, these past few weeks really made me realize something. Actually, it was all thanks to Kai, who introduced me, to Stev." Effie stretched, making Sunny stutter and lose the train of thought for a second, then smiled with satisfaction and glanced at him. "Really? And what is that?" Sunny hesitated for a few moments and said, "When I was a little kid, I loved reading webtoons about the Awakened. You know, the ones where they always explore ancient ruins, battle nightmare creatures, and grow more powerful with each victory." She chuckled. The hero and his cohort decide on an adventure, vanquish evil, gain mighty memories, and then return to the real world and sell their spoils at the adventurer's shop. They spend their money to upgrade their equipment and immediately set out on a more epic and dangerous adventure. Cassie smiled. "I love to read those too." Sunny glanced at her and sighed. "Yeah, but when I got older, I couldn't help but think, what are they thinking about? Exploring ancient ruins is not a wise thing to do. In fact, only crazy people would do it. No matter how good you are, sooner or later you will meet something more terrifying than any human can handle and die. If this was real life, why would all those adventurers go into the ruins over and over again?" The blind girl tilted her head and opened her mouth, but then closed it again. Sunny smiled. "But then it hit me. They were not doing it to vanquish evil. They were doing it to collect a wide variety of powerful memories. You see, the real dream is not the hero, one of their companions, or even the love interest. The real dream is to be the owner of a shop where the hero sells his trophies and buys new equipment. That way you can live a pretty life without risking your neck. That's the real goal." He crossed his arms and added, "After a Few short years of adventuring around the dream realm and collecting memories, you can retire, open a shop, and live comfortably for the rest of your life. All you need to do is sell a memory once every couple of years. And maybe make some money off of the younger, less fortunate adventurers, too. Kai laughed and looked at Sunny with curiosity. So, say that we somehow manage to return to the real world and become true awakened. Is that what you're going to do? Sunny thought about it for a few moments and shrugged. I don't know. I don't really have a lot to do in the real world, apart from compiling all the things I've learned about the Forgotten Shore into a report and giving it to a teacher who was kind to me back at the academy, so maybe? I don't have enough memories yet to open a real store, though. He glanced at the charming archer and smiled. What about you? What is the thing you really want to do if you return to the real world? Kai suddenly turned away with a look of embarrassment on his face. Oh, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. But after several seconds, he suddenly said in a shy voice, Avatar singer? Sunny blinked. A what? The archer hesitated for a while, and then explained. Avatar singer is a music competition show. Popular singers compete with each other, but the twist is they are all using the stock VR avatars to perform, so the judges can only evaluate their voices and skill. They only learn the singer's identity after. Effie giggled. Why would you want to hide your pretty face, Nat? It's your best feature. Kai was silent for a few moments, and then smiled gently. I just think that it would be nice to be judged based on my skill and talent alone, with nothing else getting in the way. Also, that would be such a great way to announce my return to the fans. Just imagine. They would be so excited. That would be a perfect media storm. Sunny shook his head. It seemed that Kai was really a celebrity, talking about things like fan reactions and media storms with a straight face. Did he even hear himself? But it was a nice dream, at least. Better than his own stupid desires by far. Turning to Effie, he asked, What about you? What would you want to do in the real world? The huntress grinned. I don't even have to think about it. I would go eat chicken wings, real ones, and then start preparing myself for the second nightmare. Pretty simple. Everybody grew silent. After a while, Cassie said, Are you sure that you want to challenge another nightmare? Effie shrugged. I have my reasons, so yes. For me, that is the only choice. The blind girl was quiet for a bit, and then said, I would go and spend time with my mom and dad. That's the thing I want to do most in the real world. Castor glanced at her and Courtly nodded. I agree with Cassie. Family is the most important. When I come back, I will greet my father and look him in the eye with pride, knowing that I did not let our clan down. Then I will try to do everything in my power to grow as fast as possible, to relieve him of his worries and propel our bloodline to new heights. How very legacy-like of him. Finally, turning to Nephis, Sunny looked at her with a subtly dark expression and asked, How about you, Neph? What are you going to do when you return to the real world? Changing Star was silent for a while, looking into the distance with a calm expression. Then she sighed and answered in a quiet voice. I would go visit my mom, too. Everyone grew silent. Sunny blinked, a little confused. Wait, your mom? I thought she was dead. Nephis lingered for a bit, and then turned her face away. She is, technically. Chapter 2:10 Shadow of the Past. Technically dead? What does she mean? Sunny glanced at the others and saw that they, too, were confused. Everyone except for Castor, that is, who seemed like he knew something. A few moments passed in tense silence, which was broken by Changing Star's sigh. Looking at them, she said evenly, My mother is one of the Hollow. She became hollow while pregnant with me, actually, so I never really met her. Just her body. Nephis grew silent. After a while, a strange smile appeared on her face. It's funny, really. When my grandmother was still alive, I made a point of treating that body as nothing but a corpse. But once she passed away and we were the only ones left, well, I found myself getting a bit confused. Nephis shrugged and turned away once again. Anyway, Before leaving for the first nightmare, I used what little money that was left of our estate to buy her a VIP spot in a specialized hollow care facility. They are treating her really well, but still, I don't like the idea of her being alone there. So when I return, that's what I'm going to do. Visit her. No one said anything, heavily affected by her words. Sunny stared at Changing Star, trying to imagine what it must have felt like growing up in the company of your parents' soulless shell, with death staring at you through those empty eyes every day, always looming over you like a dark shadow, both of your past and your future. Maybe that was a part of the reason why Neff hated the spell so much. Sensing the heaviness in the air, Changing Star glanced at them and smiled darkly. What, is this your first time meeting a Hollowborn? Well, I can't blame you. Creatures of my breed are pretty rare. In fact, even I have never met another one. Then she sighed and stretched her legs, moving them closer to the fire. So yeah, that and dye my hair. These are the things I would like to do in the real world first. Sunny blinked. Dye your hair? Nephis nodded. How was that a priority? Feeling that he was missing something, Sunny scratched his head and asked, Why? She glanced at him in surprise. What do you mean, why? I'm not used to it, and it's weird. Do I need another reason? He stared at her with a perplexed expression. Noticing it, Changing Star frowned and asked with a tiny hint of amusement in her voice, Sunny, did you perhaps think that this is my natural hair color? He was silent for a while, then opened his mouth and closed it again. It's not? Nephis looked at him for a while with a strange expression, and then suddenly exploded with laughter. Her laugh was melodic, pure, and very pleasant to the ear. With regret, Sunny realized that he had never heard it before. He wished that their lives were different, so that people could hear Nephis laugh more often. But they weren't, and would probably never be. After a while, she glanced at him and smiled. Sunny, it's Silver, for spell's sake. Who has natural silver hair? Luckily, at that point, Kai suddenly came to his rescue. Actually, I thought that it's natural, too. It suits you very well, Lady Nephis. Changing Star turned to him with an expression of utter surprise. Then she glanced at Effie with a silent question. The huntress nodded. Yeah, me too. I mean, who knows what you legacies are even made of? Nephis blinked a couple of times, then shook her head in bewilderment. Well, no, it's not natural. It became like that after my first nightmare. Kai leaned forward with curiosity. Really? What color was your hair before? She shrugged. Black, a normal human color. The charming archer stared at her, and then smiled. That would suit you very well too, Lady Nephis. I can just see it. However, Sunny couldn't. The idea of Changing Star without her arresting, eye-catching silver hair simply could not fit into his head. Let alone the fact that she was a brunette. How was that even possible? That would look so wrong, right? Well, as it turned out, life was full of surprises. Today, he learned not one, but two entirely new things about the person he had thought he knew the best in the world. Who would have guessed that this would happen? There might be something else except for skimpy swimsuits to these beach episodes, huh? After that, they spent some time resting and lazily conversing with each other. However, pretty soon, people started to get restless from boredom. To combat it somehow, Sunny suggested the idea of playing a sports game. His motives were not at all dictated by a secret desire to see a bunch of absolutely gorgeous young people jump around and wrestle with each other while very lightly dressed. Nope, not one bit. However, things didn't go as he had envisioned them. Pretty soon, Sunny had found himself cursing as he was desperately pulling on the golden rope in a furious match of tug-of-war. Well, it was supposed to be furious, but what was actually transpiring was Effie casually holding the rope with one hand while the four of them, Sunny, Cassie, Kai, and Castor, were trying to move her from the spot with no visible results whatsoever. After a while, the huntress simply pulled on the rope and sent their entire team to the ground. That's that's cheating! With a satisfied grin, Effie walked over and towered above him, her arms akimbo. Looking down directly at Sunny, she smirked. Weak. When did you lose your spirit, shorty? Then she winked and said in a mischievous tone, Back at the cathedral you were able to perform better, not to mention last longer. Sunny grew bright red and gritted his teeth. Shut up! People would misunderstand! The huntress looked at him with a shocked expression. Misunderstand? What are you... Oh! Then she pretended to be horrified and covered her mouth with one hand. What kind of degenerate are you? Training! I meant while you were training! While Sunny was staring at her in utter disbelief, his mouth wide open, Effie snorted, then turned away and exploded with laughter. Shaking her head, the boisterous huntress giggled one last time and walked away. No more sports games. Never! That wretched troublemaker will win them all anyway. He needed to teach himself how to come up with better ideas. Chapter 2:11 Game of Lies. With a bit of disappointment, Sunny realized that all types of physical activities were out of the question. Not only because Effie was going to win every damn game, but also because Cassie couldn't participate in most. If that was the case, they would have to settle for a battle of wit instead. After thinking for a while, he made a few preparations and addressed his companions in a mischievous tone. All right, let's have another competition. This time it will be a challenge for your minds. Sunny paused for a few moments and then smiled. And, to spice things up, this time there will be a prize. The winner will get this. With that, he produced the ascended soul shard that he had gotten from the corpse eater from behind his back and showed it to everyone. The beautiful crystal shined with an alluring ethereal light. Except for Nephis, who was resting with her eyes closed, everyone stared at the shard with a lot of interest. Sunny grinned. Of course they were interested. It was very rare to see one of these, after all. He didn't really have a use for this thing right now, though, and making the cohort stronger would, in turn, increase his own chances of getting through the expedition alive. So parting with the shard was not that detrimental, especially if he could have some fun in return. Effie was the first one to speak. What are the terms of the competition? Sunny put the crystal away before answering. It's really simple. I'll give you a riddle, and the first person to answer correctly wins. How does that sound? The huntress looked at him with doubt and shrugged. Sounds boring, but all right, let's play. Smiling, Sunny commanded the shadow to separate from him and put the ordinary rock on it. Then he turned to Effie and said, Listen carefully. Imagine, if you will, that the two of us, my shadow and I, are in possession of a rare treasure. One of us is an honorable, extremely attractive awakened that can tell no lie, while the other one is a vile, ugly, stupid devil that would never tell a word of truth. But you don't know which is which. Effie grinned. I mean, isn't it obvious? Sunny blinked. Shut up! Also, it's an imaginary situation, okay? Anyway, you have to find out which one of us is hiding the treasure. If you do, you'll get the treasure. If you don't, the devil will kill you. And you can only ask one question, either to me or the shadow. Understand? The huntress giggled and flexed her muscles. Can I just beat the answer out of you? Sunny observed her vigorous figure for a moment too long, and then smiled. You can. Also, you're dead. Effie stared at him in bewilderment. What? Why? He shrugged and glanced in her direction with disdain. Did I not tell you that you can only ask one question? Well, who told you to ask whether you can beat me up or not? What a stupid way to waste a question. While the unruly huntress was throwing daggers at him with her eyes, Sunny turned away and said, Next. Kai smiled apologetically at Effie and approached him. All right, Knight, what's your question? Do consider that our roles might have changed since the last round. The charming young man gestured at the marble beneath his feet and addressed the shadow. What color's the stone I'm pointing to? Since Sunny had expected such a turn of events, the ordinary rock immediately answered in the deepest voice he could muster. What? Kai looked at Sunny with a triumphant smile and said, "So, I win? The shadow is obviously the honorable awakened." Sunny gave him a nod. "You indeed learned which one of us is a dirty liar. Surprise, it was me. However, that was not the task. The task was to find out which one of us is hiding the treasure. And you've already used up your only question. So, sorry, buddy, but you're also dead. I'll miss you very much, in this hypothetical situation." The charming archer sighed and looked at him with reproach. Sonny raised his eyebrows. "What? Why are you looking at me like this? Be grateful that I allowed you to play at all. With your flaw, you are like a walking cheat as far as this game is concerned." He scowled and added, "In fact, the mere fact that you claim to have a flaw is an affront to us truly flawed people." Kai lingered for a bit and walked to the side to sit near Effie. Sonny had to suppress his laugh when he noticed that the boisterous huntress reacted to being this close to the charming young man's deific body pretty much exactly the same as he himself sometimes reacted to her. "Get your head out of the god's pure thoughts, Effie." A wide grin still found its way onto his face. Shaking his head, Sonny turned away to call the next contestant, but Kai suddenly spoke, interrupting him. "You're not entirely right, you know," he said gently. Sonny raised an eyebrow. About what?" The archer looked down before answering. "About my flaw. Yes, it is not as heavy of a burden as many others have to carry, but it's still a curse." What is he talking about? It's almost entirely like a second aspect ability. Looking at Kai with a doubtful expression, Sonny asked, "Yeah? How exactly? Please explain, because I really can't think of a situation where this flaw of yours could be a burden." The beautiful young man was silent for a while, and then looked up at Sonny with a sad smile. "Imagine hearing the person who is the most important to you in the whole world telling you that they love you, only to realize that they don't. Imagine listening to your friend's words of encouragement, only to understand that he secretly wishes for you to crash and burn." He sighed. "Ignorance is bliss, Sonny. After returning from my first nightmare, I had to come to terms with the fact that most of the people in my life were not who I thought they were, and that what hid behind their smiles was ugly and vicious." Kai gestured to himself and said, "Because of who I am and how I am, there was always a whirlpool of people around me. But after learning their truth faces, I couldn't... Well, let's just say this. If I had the choice, I would have preferred to stay blissfully blind to the truth forever." He grew quiet. "Damn." Suddenly, Kai smiled. "But that's why I enjoy spending time with you so much, Sonny. No matter how bizarre the things you say are, they're always true. I've never met anyone as stupidly honest as you. It's very refreshing." Sonny shifted uncomfortably. Did he just call me stupid? Now he was kind of sorry for mocking the charming young man about his flaw. Perhaps it would be useful to someone like Sonny, but to a person like Kai, who always attracted the worst kind of attention from people, it could be incredibly painful. The spell knew what it was doing. It always hit you in your most vulnerable spot. Damned spell. The being that weaved it must have been the worst kind of sick bastard. Chapter 2:12. Knights and Knaves. Sure. One day, Kai would inevitably learn that Sonny was not as honest of a person as he considered him to be. But until then, having the naive archer believe in this ridiculous notion was rather beneficial. Turning away with a bit of awkwardness, Sonny glanced at Castor and called, "Next?" The proud legacy was looking at Nightingale with a heavy expression. Hearing Sonny's voice, he lingered for a moment and then shook his head. It seemed that Castor did not want to play his game. Sonny was also suddenly painfully aware that between the 6 of them, 4 people had openly shared their flaws with the rest, be it out of necessity or because of trust. Only 2 had not. One of the 2 was Sonny, and the other one was Castor. Sonny knew why he was hiding his flaw from everyone, but what was the proud scion's reason? It sort of went against his whole honorable and dependable persona. With how devoted he acted toward Nephis and the cohort, it was strange to see him keeping secrets. Was his reason the same as Sunny's? A dire vulnerability that the flaw would uncover? Or was there some other reason? Maybe he didn't trust the members of the cohort as much as he tried to make them think he did. And if so, why? With a shrug, Sunny left Castor alone. There was no point in lingering on these thoughts now. Until he had more information, any conclusion he could make would be useless anyways. Looking at Cassie, he smiled and said, "Hey, Cass, want to give it a try?" The blind girl hesitated for a bit and then slowly approached him. While she was walking over, Sunny couldn't help but think back to a conversation he had with her in the distant past. Back then, Cassie had told him that knowledge could be the heaviest thing in the world. The burden of her flaw, while completely different from Kai's, was at the same time eerily similar. They both longed for the bliss of ignorance, but were doomed to always bear the crushing weight of unwanted knowledge. When Sunny thought about it, he found that all members of the cohort were connected with each other by invisible strings. Many things about them were like reflections, simultaneously the same, but also completely opposite. Like the fact that he could tell no lie, while Kai could not be lied to. Or the fact that Nephis was like sunlight, while he was made of shadows. Cassie could not see, while he had basically two pairs of eyes. Changing Star dreamed of destroying the nightmare spell, but Effie dreamed of making it her paradise. And so on. Were these the strings of fate? Or was he just making empty connections because that was what humans were prone to do? Come to think of it, only Castor didn't seem to be connected to any of them in any kind of meaningful way. What was that all about? Cassie sat down near Sunny, pulling him out of his thoughts. He forced out a smile. "Ah, right. Just like I said, the roles might have switched. So, what is your question?" Cassie smiled and gestured to the shadow. "My question is, if I were to ask Sunny which one of you has the treasure, what would he say?" Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then gave the ordinary stone a mental command to speak one of the answers that he had whispered to it in advance. In the same comically deep voice, the shadow seemed to speak. "The shadow has it." Cassie nodded and turned to Sunny with a subtle glee in her exquisite, doll-like face. "Sunny, you have the treasure. Give." With that, she expectantly outstretched her hand. With a disappointed sigh, Sunny put the ascended soul shard in her palm and said in a listless voice, "Congratulations, you've won. Great job, yay." Cassie grasped the shard and giggled. Meanwhile, Effie leaned forward with a bewildered look. "What? That's it?" She stared at the blind girl in astonishment and then asked, "How the hell did you do it?" Cassie smiled and crushed the shard in her small fist, absorbing the soul essence. Then she shook her head and said, "It's simple, really. No matter who you ask about the other person's answer, their answer will always be the opposite of the correct one. That's because the awakened would have to tell the truth about the lie, while the devil would have to tell a lie about the truth. Do you understand?" Effie thought for a moment, then shook her head. "Nope, all the words you said seem to be familiar, but I don't understand crap. What do you even mean?" Cassie laughed. "Well, you should think about it in your free time. Or, just beat up Sunny the next time he decides to tease you with such riddles." With that, she went away, quite happy with herself. Sunny watched her go with his mouth wide open. Did she really just say that? Meanwhile, the perplexed huntress was staring at Sunny with a deep frown. "Yeah, I might just do that next time." He paled. "What's up with that? This was an honest competition. Don't be such a sore loser." Effie grinned menacingly. "Sore? Let's see which one of us will be sore when I'm done with you." What? What kind of soreness does she mean, I wonder? Wait, no, why would I wonder about that? Standing up, Sunny glanced at Effie and scoffed. "Who's going to be done with who? Don't flatter yourself, beanpole." With that, he walked away with contempt clearly written all over his face. His pace, however, was suspiciously hurried. A while later, the day was drawing to a close. Some of the memories had already restored themselves, so almost everyone was wearing their clothes and armors, which, as far as Sunny was concerned, was a real shame. From a purely aesthetic point of view, of course. However, something else attracted his full attention. At the far end of the marble arch, Nephis and Castor were standing facing each other, with sharp swords in their hands. They were about to clash. Chapter 213 Sword Saints. Back when Nephis was teaching Sunny how to use the sword, he had never been good enough to be her sparring partner. Once he learned enough to be of any use in a training fight, their fragile alliance had already broken and shattered to pieces. So, apart from that short altercation on the somber slopes of the Ashen Barrow, they had never actually crossed swords with each other. Now, it seemed, Changing Star had found a reliable sparring partner. Castor had not only replaced Sunny as her right-hand man, but also filled the roles that Sunny had been either reluctant or unfit to take on. Well, good for them. Once the memories of the cohort were close to being fully restored, Nephis and Castor moved to the far end of the White Arch to practice. Now they were standing opposite each other, ready to begin. Although no one called him over, Sunny approached the two legacies and sat down, ready to enjoy the spectacle. He was keenly interested in observing these two immensely skilled swordsmen in action. Both of them had been trained for combat from the day they could walk. Watching them would surely be helpful to his understanding of battle styles and techniques, not to mention that he was very interested to see the rematch between Nephis and Castor. The last time he saw them fight, Changing Star had lost, but not by much. She also held back her aspect ability at that time, but he doubted that would change today. Neff's flames could be used both to heal and annihilate, but sadly not to train. Castor glanced at him and frowned with visible displeasure. Was he irritated because Sunny was about to learn a thing or two about his technique, or because Sunny was ruining his alone time with Nephis? Either way, I don't care. What are you doing? Sunny shrugged. Watching? Why? Does this part of the arch belong to your clan or something? The proud legacy shook his head and turned away. Do as you wish. Neff glanced at Sunny and didn't say anything. However, he could tell that she didn't mind. In fact, it was almost as if she was approving of his decision. Without wasting any more time, the two of them clashed in a whirlwind of steel, moving with the kind of speed that made it difficult for Sunny to follow along. The clangor of swords filled the air. A bit stunned, he stared at the furious fight with a blank expression. Damn. After the months of hunting monsters in the Dark City and his lessons with the Stone Saint, Sunny thought that he had developed his skill a lot. And he did. It's just that compared to Nephis and Castor, he was still so far behind that it was nothing short of disheartening. Before, he had sometimes entertained the thought of maybe being able to stand against them. Well, at least one of them, on equal ground. But now, this illusion was ruthlessly broken. If things went south and he ended up on the opposite sides of the barricades with Castor, facing him would be tantamount to committing suicide. For now, at least. Which, of course, simply meant that instead of facing him, Sunny would have to stab him in the back. Duly noted. He wasn't going to take on an enemy of this caliber in a forthright manner anyway. What was he, a fool? Concentrating on the fight, Sunny watched attentively. With the benefit of his new experience, he was able to discern more and learn more from how these two experts moved and acted. Sometimes he was even able to predict what they were going to do next. However, as time passed, a subtle frown appeared on his face. What is she doing? That doesn't make any sense. Sunny had been able to notice two unexpected things from how Nephis fought against Castor. The first one was rather easy to spot. While Castor did not use the full extent of his incredible speed, he did use a fair share of it, making it almost impossible for Nephis to win any of their matches. She lost much more than she won, almost always by a few fractions of a second, which was seemingly not conducive to training at all. What was the point of training if one of the participants had almost no way of winning because of how large the gap between them and their opponent was? There was a reason why Neff had never used Sunny as a sparring partner in the past, after all. But then, with a bit of amusement, he realized that Changing Star was doing exactly what he had done with the Stone Saint. She was tempering herself against an overwhelming force. That's why she had instructed Castor to use just enough of his aspect ability to be much faster than her. Losing in a fight against a superior opponent was truly the best way to learn. Ha! So I was right in my approach after all. If Changing Star was doing the same, he had to be right. The second thing he had noticed, however, was much more perplexing. It was that Nephis was not using her usual flowing and unpredictable battle style. Instead, she was moving with precise and firm elegance, hiding behind a carefully woven wall of defense and patiently waiting for an opening to appear, instead of creating one herself. While intricate and impressive, this style was still a bit lacking in comparison to a real one. What's more, while it was deliberate and dependable, it was also rigid. If there was one thing that Nephis would never tolerate in her battle art, it was rigidity. Her whole worldview was built around the idea that nothing had more value than adaptability. That's why the style she had taught Sunny suited her so well. It was designed to be the epitome of changeability. So, the question was, why the hell was she using something so alien to her against Castor? The answer was pretty obvious. Either Nephis was trying to experiment with something new in an effort to adopt elements of this style into her own, which didn't seem very likely, or she didn't want Castor to know her true combat style too well for some reason. But what could that reason be? Sunny rubbed his chin. Interesting. Chapter 214. Transient Shadow. Did Nephis distrust Castor for some reason? Sunny surely did, and to be entirely honest, he didn't even need a reason to do so. His intuition and general paranoia were enough. But Changing Star was different. He had learned a bitter lesson and now knew that everything she ever did had a firm logic behind it, even if that logic was entirely different from that of a normal person. So, if Nephis was hiding her true battle style from Castor, there was a reason for it. But it didn't make any sense. From everything else that she had done, he was her most trusted lieutenant. Changing Star entrusted more to Castor than she had ever to anyone else. Castor himself also had never acted against Neff's interest. In fact, he was even a bit too loyal. The bastard was always near Nephis, as though glued to her side. He also didn't seem to like it when others got too close to her. In that regard, he was almost like that flying rapier of Cassie's. During their entire day on the Marble Arch, the unfriendly Echo somehow always managed to remain between the blind girl and any men who tried to approach her for whatever reason. The message it was sending was quite clear. "I'm watching you." It was honestly rather comical. Sunny shook his head. The dynamic of Changing Star's relationship with Castor was really weird. But once again, he didn't have enough information to make any conclusions. All he could do was keep his eyes open and try to sleep with one of them open while the handsome legacy was on watch duty. Maybe it was some strange legacy thing? Like guarding the secrets of the clan against the prying eyes of other clans. Who knew? Glancing at the fighting swordsman, Sunny suddenly got an idea. After considering it for a bit, he looked at them again. This time his eyes were burning. That might actually work. The problem with his technique at the moment was that it lacked true individuality. Sunny knew that there was a secret hiding inside his shadow that could become the foundation of its own unique battle style. He just couldn't understand what that secret was. His progress at deciphering it had stalled. While training, Sunny had trouble keeping his eyes both on the Stone Saint and on the shadow. Whenever he tried, the taciturn knight would inevitably send him into a sea of pain. But even if he managed it somehow, there was an invisible wall standing between him and anything even remotely resembling understanding. He was in dire need of a breakthrough. So what if his shadows tried to imitate someone else instead of him? And not just someone, but a real sword expert in the middle of a fight. Not only would Sunny be able to observe every tiny detail of its movements, but there would also be something to compare them against. The shadow was a part of him, after all. It was hard to tell where Sunny ended and the shadow began. That's why the difference in how it moved and how he moved was almost imperceptible. But if it followed someone else, he would be able to separate the cadence and pattern of that person's movements from the shadows by contrasting it with his own. This had to work. Burning with anticipation, Sunny waited for Nephis and Castor to take a short break, and then to send his shadow over to the handsome legacy. Leisurely strolling over the white marble, the shadow approached Castor and brazenly glued itself to his feet. Then it crossed its arms and glared at the legacy with almost palpable disdain. Castor stared at the shadow for a couple of seconds and then raised his head to look at Sunny. There was a very strange expression on his face. What? What are you doing? His voice did not sound happy at all. Sunny shrugged with a carefree smile. Oh, don't mind him. This cretin just lost me an ascended soul shard. As a form of punishment, I've decided to make him your shadow for a bit. So, just do your thing and don't worry about it. The shadow turned its head and pierced him with a menacing look. Sunny could practically hear its thoughts. Who are you calling a cretin, you cretin? That had to be it. Did I guess right? Oh, sorry, I forgot that you cannot answer. Not paying the offended shadow any more attention, he just smiled wider. Castor frowned, hesitated for a few moments, and then said through gritted teeth, I would prefer if you wouldn't. Sunny sighed. All right, whatever. With that, he gave the shadow the command to leave the proud legacy alone. It separated itself from Castor, pretended to wipe its legs in disgust, and sauntered over to Nephis, only to get attached to her feet with visible delight. It even bowed gallantly to her own shadow and made sure to not get in its way. What is this moron doing? Of course, Sunny had ordered the shadow to approach Neph himself, but he didn't expect it to be so visibly pleased by it. It was as if the shadow was simply beyond itself to finally follow someone competent. You traitor. Neph looked down on the shadow, smiled, and didn't say anything. Well, good. Now fight. The two legacies did not make him wait long. A few moments later, they were once again locked in a furious battle. Only this time, two shadows were following Nephis. Both of them loyally imitated her movements. However, one of them was slightly, almost imperceptibly, different. Sunny looked at it with an intensity that threatened to burn two holes in the white marble. Soon, his eyes widened. I see it. I think I see it. There, in the tiniest difference between the way Changing Star's own shadow moved and the way his shadow moved, he finally saw it. He had found his breakthrough. Chapter 215. Shapeless. Observing the motions of two shadows that followed Nephis, Sunny was finally able to understand the foundation of the elusive shadow style. Before, he only sensed a hint of its essence. He knew that, just like the shadow, the hidden battle art was insidious, shapeless, and ever-changing. But this was where lay the problem. A battle style was, by definition, a structured framework of patterns and principles, a doctrine that dictated how one should act to defeat an enemy. That doctrine was used as a foundation and expanded into a variety of specific movements to create a style. But if something didn't have a shape, and its form was constantly changing, how could it ever be stable and structured? Sunny had no idea how the concepts he felt were at the core of the shadow style could create something even remotely applicable to practice. Insidious, shapeless, ever-changing. What was he supposed to do with that? But now, he understood. The key to it all was so simple and evident that he almost laughed. Why had he not guessed earlier? It was so obvious. The idea that tied everything together was as innate to the nature of shadows as formlessness and elusiveness. It was imitation. After all, what were the first two things that came to mind when one thought about shadows? That they lived in the dark and imitated the things that hid from the light. The foundation of the shadow style was indeed insidious, shapeless, and ever-changing. Its core concept was to steal that which made the enemy strong and use it to destroy them. To master that style, he had to learn how to behave like a shadow. Sonny stared at Nefs and Castor, but didn't see them. His mind was consumed completely by the sudden revelation. He had no time to pay attention to their fight anymore. This style had endless potential. If he managed to master it, he would be able to counter any style or technique used against him, not to mention become an immensely unpredictable opponent. What could be more unpredictable than a formless shadow? Of course, it was easier said than done. To begin with, while the ability to imitate the enemy was incredibly powerful, it also demanded an incredible amount of talent, experience, and insight from the user. You couldn't imitate that which you didn't understand, after all. More importantly, this was just the foundation of the style. He still had to expand it into the actual collection of specific principles, and retrain himself accordingly. That was a mammoth task. Creating a complete style from scratch could take a true battle master years, if not decades. Sonny had not even scratched the surface of this ambitious undertaking. However, this was all right. It was a start. Personal battle arts were not created in an instant anyway. It was a long and arduous process, with endless iterations coming and going while being tempered by the crucible of combat. It's not like the style would be useless until it became perfect. Sonny just had to get it to the point where it could be applied in battle in one form or another. That alone would tremendously enhance his technique. He smiled, congratulating himself. However, the next moment, a deep scowl appeared on his face. But how exactly am I supposed to do that? A while later, when the sun was already touching the western horizon, Sonny was sitting by himself and staring at his shadow. He was motionless like a statue when deep in thought. On his face there was a troubled frown. When someone approached him, Sonny lingered for a few moments, and then slowly looked up to see who was disturbing him. To his surprise, it was Nefis. The leader of their cohort stood there for a bit, her graceful figure illuminated by the setting sun. Then she sat down near him. Sonny blinked. Hey, Neff. Nefis gave him a nod. Hey, Sonny. He waited for a few moments, and then asked, Did you want something? The corner of her mouth slightly curled upward. With a sigh, Changing Star glanced at him and said, It's nothing much. I just wanted to say that I saw you fighting in the catacombs. You have improved a lot in these 3 months. Well done. Sonny smiled. That. Well, it's not like there's a lot of opportunities to lead a peaceful life in the Dark City. I was bound to improve a little, no? She shook her head. Don't sell yourself short. You did really well. Very few would have been able to grow so much and as fast as you, especially without a teacher. After hesitating for a while, Sonny shrugged. You said it yourself. One real battle is worth more than 1,000 hours of training. There was a lot of battles in those 3 months. Nevis nodded and then asked, That firm and grounded style you weaved into your technique, where did it come from? He scratched the back of his head and, remembering the hellish training sessions with his pet monster, held back the urge to shiver. I just observed how the Stone Saint fought and tried to replicate it. Changing Star smiled. As I thought, I've seen her fight too. It's a very formidable echo. One of the finest I've ever seen. Coming from a legacy, this meant a lot. Sonny was indeed really lucky to be in the right place at the right time to get the echo of the Stone Saint. If the fallen siblings of the Iron Spiders had not brought her to the brink of death, he would never have been able to survive a battle with the living statue, let alone defeat her. He was even luckier to have a divine aspect that allowed him to turn echoes into creatures that were even more fearsome. All in all, Sonny was extremely fortunate. His fortune was exactly as incredible as his misfortune. He grinned. You know my attributes. I do get lucky a lot. She lingered for a few moments and then said, I'm glad that you were able to understand the true design of the battle style I taught you. So, he was right on this point as well. The style Changing Star had given him was indeed designed to be as adaptable as possible and seamlessly incorporate elements of other styles. It was a perfect foundational battle art. For those talented enough to make use of it, of course. Which were, most likely, extremely few and far between. Sonny glanced at Nevis and, after some deliberation, asked, That style of yours is truly unique. Where did it come from? He had been too inexperienced to realize this at the time, but what Neff had taught him could have been considered a rare treasure. The style he took for granted was, in fact, a work of pure genius. It deserved to be famous and ubiquitous. But it was not, which suggested that this treasure was a secret one. Changing Star lingered for a bit, and then said, It's a part of my inheritance. Sonny blinked and stared at her, stunned. Then why the hell did she teach it to me? Chapter 216 Tacit Understanding. Sonny stared at Nephis with a complicated expression. After a while, he asked, Why did you entrust me with something so precious? She glanced at him, lingered for a few moments, then shrugged. We had a deal, remember? My knowledge in exchange for your share of the spoils we earn. There had indeed existed such a deal. However, he had not exactly acted in good faith when proposing it. After all, he had no use for those spoils in the first place. Sonny scowled. If Changing Star had really revealed a family secret to him because of a lie, she had a valid reason to be resentful of him. Just like he was of her. With a dark smile, he looked away and said, You must have realized by now that I have cheated you in that deal. Nephis turned to him and said, her voice calm and even, You mean the fact that you don't need to absorb soul shards to grow stronger? Sonny froze for a moment, then gave her a nod. You don't seem very surprised. Figures. When Sonny first learned about this ability of his, he was stunned. But Neff seemed to know a lot about the spell more than a normal person did. She didn't even try to pretend otherwise. It's a very rare aspect trait, but not unheard of among the upper echelons of the awakened. In fact, I am capable of something like that myself, although your case does seem to be especially unique. Sonny glanced at her. How so? Changing Star remained silent for a few moments, and then said, her voice hinted with a bit of wonder, Usually, when an awakened absorbs the soul essence directly, the process leaves the remnants of the soul core empty. But when you do it, the shards are left brimming with it. This is very unusual. He shifted uncomfortably, and then said, Yeah, well, you have your share of secrets too, Neff. Don't think that I didn't notice. Lineage memories, domains. Nephis interrupted him with a heavy gaze. When Sonny fell silent and looked at her with a frown, she said in a strangely somber tone, Never say those words aloud again, Sonny. I am serious. Just knowing them might get you killed. He stared at her for a long time, and then scoffed. No problem. Since you showed me the courtesy of not prying into my secrets, I won't pry into yours. I don't really want to know anyway. The mysterious upper echelons you mentioned can play their dirty little games all they want, as long as they leave me out of them. Then Sonny frowned and added, But there is one question I have to ask you, because it involves me personally. She raised an eyebrow. Sure, ask away. He grimaced. Why are you hiding the true core of your technique from Castor? Changing Star looked at him for a bit, and then smiled. So, you've noticed. That's good too. Yes, I've been using a different style when facing Castor. Sunny looked at her with a humorless expression. Why? She shrugged. Why did you incorporate elements of the Stone Saint's technique into yours? He shook his head. To become stronger. Also, nice tried misdirection, but I won't fall for your tricks. I'm the one who taught them to you, remember? So just stop. Answer my question. Nephis sighed and turned away, glancing at the silhouette of the crimson spire that loomed in the distance. After a while, she said, I'll answer you when we return to the Dark City. It won't change anything until then, anyway. Your safety won't be compromised in any way. What is that supposed to mean? As he glared at her, Changing Stars stood up and turned to leave. Before that, however, she lingered for a moment and said, Keep sharpening your sword, Sonny. I expect big things from you. With that, she walked away, leaving him speechless. And what does she mean by that? After Nephis left, Sonny returned to staring at his shadow. However, despite the fact that he had figured out the essence and foundation of the elusive battle art that hid inside it, he had no idea how to go about creating an actual style out of them. He did not have enough experience and mastery to be able to create something out of nothing. It was a dead end. Curses! Why even hide that damn mystery inside the aspect if I can't do anything with it? Perhaps in the distant future he would be able to. But right now, it was as though he had found the door, but was not strong enough to turn the key and unlock it. It just stood there and teased him endlessly, just like the damn gateway inside the Crimson Spire. It was pure torture. Maybe I wasn't supposed to notice the existence of this hidden style so soon. But he did, and he worked so hard to gain insight into its secrets. Was it all for nothing? All the pain, all the effort? Why would the spell do this to him? Do you have to ask? That's the damn spell we're talking about. Why wouldn't it do something like this to you? With a bitter sigh, Sunny turned away and tried to forget all about the shadow, techniques, and battle styles. It was almost dark anyway. Time to sleep. Walking over to the center of the marble arch, Sunny lay down beside the other members of the cohort and tiredly closed his eyes. The beach vacation was over. It was funny, visually stunning, and unexpectedly emotional, but ended on a bitter note. Tomorrow was going to be another long day. To hell with this. Exhausted by all of it, he fell asleep before even finishing the thought. This crap. Sunny opened his eyes and looked around in confusion. The world was enveloped in a strange dim twilight. Deep shadows surrounded him, shrouding the tall walls that were cut from black marble. Looking between the mighty columns, Sunny saw the black circle of the sun burning in the lightless sky. An eclipse? No, wait. What walls? What columns? Wasn't he supposed to be sleeping at the top of the white arch? What was happening? Suddenly, a woman's scream tore the silence like a sharp knife. It was full of pain and suffering. Sunny tried to summon the midnight shard into his hand, only to realize that he had no hands. Then something else resounded from the darkness. A baby's cry. What the? Almost at the same time, Sunny realized something terrible. This was a dream. He was dreaming. People were not supposed to dream in the dream realm. Not good. Chapter 217. Origin. When Sunny realized that he was dreaming, the first thing that came to his mind was that there was another soul tree growing somewhere near the White Arch. However, after a few moments of panic, he quickly dismissed this idea. After all, he had never actually dreamt while under the mind hex of the ancient fiend. He had just mistaken the broken memories of his conversation with Cassie for a dream. But this one was real. The dreamscape that surrounded Sunny was ephemeral, shifting, and shrouded in shadows. Above him, the sun was like a circle of darkness, with crimson light drowning in a burning sea of clouds. However, none of that light reached him. In the tenebrous hall of black marble, there was nothing but empty silence, which was now destroyed by the sound of a baby crying, of course. The woman's screams had long grown silent. Peering into the Stygian depths of the dark marble hall, Sunny saw nothing but endless shadows. The baby's cries were coming from somewhere beyond them, or from within them. A subtle thought entered Sunny's mind. The monumental walls, the colossal columns, the grandiose hall, all of it looked strangely familiar, as though he had already been here once, a long time ago. All that was missing were the signs of desolation and a large altar cut from a single block of black marble. In fact, it should have been standing right where the crying sounds were coming from. Familiar words appeared in his mind, now full of new meaning. Child of shadows? In the next moment, everything disappeared. The world was swaying. A seemingly endless surface of black stone was flowing past his vision, moving up and down. No, it wasn't the stone, but Sunny himself. He was the one swaying. What? In fact, Sunny found himself in the body of a toddler. He was currently held gently by a young woman who was walking down a long stone corridor, which was dimly lit by burning torches, hence the swaying. The girl was very young, not older than Sunny himself, his actual body, that is. She was slender and exquisitely beautiful, with soft porcelain skin and long raven hair. The lissome beauty was dressed in a flowing silk tunic that left her delicate neck and shoulders exposed. A black serpent was coiled around her arms and neck, its scales so intricately tattooed that sometimes it seemed as though the creature was moving. Whoever marked the girl's skin with this image was a true genius of their craft. Sunny had never seen anything like it in the real world. However, he had seen similar markings in a nightmare. This was the mark of a slave who belonged to the shadow god. The young girl was a temple slave, just like he had been in his first nightmare. The serpent coiled around her neck and arms served both as her collar and her shackles. She was also the toddler's mother. Sunny could tell from the love with which she held the child and the quiet smile that appeared on her face every time she looked at him. Sunny might have lost his own mother at a young age, but he still remembered that much at least. If the mother is a slave, then the child is too. Finally, Sunny began to understand what was happening to him. The dream he found himself in did not belong to him. Instead, it belonged to the nameless temple slave, whose role he had assumed during the first nightmare. The original child of shadows. This vision was his memory. Soon the young girl entered a vast hall that was shrouded in darkness. Judging by the black marble walls, they were in another part of the ancient temple. Sunny couldn't see much of his surroundings, but he could somehow tell that they were underground. In the center of the hall, 7 tall braziers were burning with strange pale flames. On the edges of light, motionless, stood a dozen or so people. Sonny shivered, suddenly reminded of the silent shadows populating his soul sea. However, these were not ghosts but humans. There were several other slaves, while the rest appeared to be priests. To tell the truth, there was not a lot of difference between them. It seemed as though the servants of the shadow god did not pursue opulence and status. In fact, many of the priests bore the same markings as the slaves, suggesting that they themselves had belonged to the temple once. What are they doing here? What is happening? Approaching one of the elder slaves, the young beauty entrusted the child to her. Separated from the warmth of his mother's chest, the toddler, Sonny, felt cold and scared. However, the older woman consoled him with gentle words, preventing the child from crying. Then she moved back to stand with the rest of the people gathered in the underground hall. Their faces were calm and solemn. The young woman, meanwhile, slowly walked into the circle of light. Her movements were elegant, flowing, and graceful. Stopping at the very center, she stood motionlessly between the 7 pale flames, surrounded by 7 shadows. Sonny stared at the beautiful slave, feeling that something important was about to happen. But what? As he became pensive and uneasy, a sudden sound broke the silence. It was the deep and reverberating ringing of a zither. As the musical instrument sang, the slave girl suddenly moved. As she did, her 7 shadows moved with her. This is... With his eyes wide open, Sonny watched the young woman. She was dancing. The beautiful slave girl danced in the circle of light surrounded by impenetrable darkness, her every move full of indescribable grace and clear but elusive purpose. Her young body was flexible and lithe, but also strong and trained as much as a warrior's. Her skill as a dancer was like that of a battle master. It was mesmerizing. The young woman weaved a beautiful pattern with her movements, their cadence and nature simultaneously firm and flowing, sharp and gentle, clear and unpredictable. She danced alone but also with 7 partners, effortlessly controlling both her body and the 7 shadows cast by it. At times, it was hard to tell which one of them was real. Her dance was insidious, shapeless, and ever-changing. Sonny froze. He recognized these movements. They were the same as how his shadow moved. This was the source and origin of the battle style he wanted to create. This was shadow dance. Chapter 2:18 Shadow Dance. Sonny opened his eyes. The grand arch of white marble was exactly the same as when he had last seen it. The sun was already climbing the gray dome of the sky, chasing the remnants of the dark sea away. The rest of the cohort had woken up some time ago, and were now preparing for the journey ahead. He had overslept. However, it didn't matter. With eyes burning with excitement, Sonny sat up and recalled everything that he had witnessed in his dream. The memories were still there, clear as day. He could recall every movement, every step, every breath of the dance that the beautiful slave had performed. The nameless slave's mother. His eyes dimmed slightly. That dream of his, while a precious gift, was also a source of numerous questions. Now that he was awake, Sonny was able to see a few things with more clarity. The scene that he had witnessed at the very beginning of it was that of the nameless slave's, the original child of shadows, birth. He was born during a solar eclipse, not unlike Sonny. That fact put a lot of things into perspective. Everyone knew that the spell did not choose the role of an aspirant would play during their first nightmare randomly. That was apparent from the fact that the bodies they inhabited in it, while different, were very close to their real ones. However, the actual principle of how the spell chose these roles and the events of the nightmares were largely unclear. But now, Sonny knew that he shared more than simply outer appearance with the temple slave whose body he inhabited for a few short days. Both of them were born in similar, extremely rare circumstances. Both of them were at the very bottom of society, oppressed and unwanted, surviving against all odds instead of because of them. Both of them were left without a family at a young age. The tough life in the outskirts took Sonny's parents and sister away. To the nameless slave, it was the servants of the mighty war god that destroyed his childhood home and life. Sonny didn't know what happened to the beautiful dancer after the last Temple of Shadows was destroyed by them, but he doubted that it was anything good. With a heavy sigh, he looked down. Fate. It was fate. What he shared with the temple slave was a similarity of fate. Sonny was growing more and more convinced that the spell was connected to the strings of fate in some way. Perhaps it was weaved from them. Remembering the void he had found himself in after completing his first trial, Sonny looked into the distance with wonder. That void was filled with a myriad of stars that served as nexuses for an inconceivably complex net made of countless strings of silver light. Were those the strings of fate? He shook his head. Whatever they were, and whatever the spell was, it was not something he could know or understand. Yet. Numerous people, most of them better informed and smarter than him, had tried and failed. It was wiser to concentrate on something within his reach. The shadow dance. Sonny smiled. He wasn't so engrossed by the dancing of the beautiful slave girl because it was truly stunning and enchanting. He was riveted beyond belief by it because he recognized the pattern of the battle style hiding in his shadow in her graceful movements. Turns out it wasn't a battle art at all. It was a dance. But was there a difference? Not in this case, not really. It wasn't a coincidence that people often describe the way true masters of battle fought as dancing. At their core, fighting and dance were very close. That's why combat, when brought to a truly impressive level, was like a dance. So, why couldn't a dance, when mastered to perfection, be like a battle art? Sonny was certain that he was right. He had already comprehended the essence of shadow dance and gained insight into its foundation. With the memory of the beautiful dancer moving as one with her 7 shadows, he now had the last piece of the puzzle. The actual set of moves and principles that he could use to create an actual battle style in their image. He didn't have the battle art yet, but he did now possess all the components needed to create it. Of course, it was not going to be easy. Even with all the knowledge stored in his mind, he would still have to spend a lot of time and effort and spill a lot of blood, both his own and that of his enemies, to turn the graceful dance of the beautiful slave girl into a deadly dance of steel. It wasn't even certain that he would succeed. But Sonny would be damned if he wasn't going to try. Shadow dance would become his personal battle art. He was going to make it happen. As if echoing his last thought, the familiar voice of the spell suddenly whispered into his ear. When Sonny heard what she said, his eyes widened. You have received an aspect legacy, Shadow Dance. Sonny stared into the emptiness, stunned to his core by what the spell had just whispered. Aspect legacy. Did it really just say those words? He gulped. Aspect legacy was something that every aspect contained, but very few awakened ever received. Unlike the boon of the first nightmare and every nightmare after that, as well as the reward sleepers received after returning from the dream realm for the first time, each aspect legacy had a unique set of requirements that the owner of the aspect had to meet to unlock it. When they did, they were rewarded with a powerful relic. Usually it was a memory that synergized perfectly with their aspect abilities, or even sometimes an echo. Legacy clans weren't called that accidentally. While not every clan possessed an aspect legacy, most of them did. In fact, it was the acquisition of the aspect legacy that laid the foundation of the creation of many of these clans. By now, some of the most powerful clans even had several. But getting an aspect legacy was not an easy feat. Most of them were received by saints, followed by master, and only a few were won by mere awakened. Getting the aspect legacy while still being a sleeper? That was simply unheard of. Just like getting a true name during the first nightmare, I guess. Sonny couldn't believe his luck. Of course, he worked bitterly hard to be able to grasp it. And yet, the magnitude of the harvest he reaped was utterly unbelievable. However, why was his aspect legacy not a memory, but a battle art? That was really strange. Not wasting any time, Sonny summoned the runes and hungrily searched for the new ones. What he saw made him tremble. Chapter 219 Relics of the Past. Right there in the glimmering field of familiar runes, in the cluster describing his aspect, a new string of them appeared. Aspect, Shadow Slave. Aspect rank, Divine. Aspect abilities, Shadow Control. Aspect legacy, Shadow Dance. As soon as Sonny concentrated on the aspect legacy, new runes shined to describe it. Shadow Dance description. Once an elegant dance, now a deadly battle art. This mysterious style was created by the treacherous Lost from Light after witnessing a graceful slave dancing with her shadows. Who else could have taken something so beautiful and turned it into something so vile? Sonny coughed, trying hard not to think about too much about the manner in which the spell had described him. Again with this treacherous stuff. I'm not that treacherous, okay? So what if I lie, manipulate, and backstab people all the time? That's just being smart. However, what grabbed his attention was not the description itself, but what glimmered beneath it. Shadow Dance Mastery Level. 0 of 7. First relic, unearned. Second relic, unearned. Third relic. There were a total of 7 lines of runes, each promising him a legacy relic once he achieved the corresponding level of mastery with his newly envisioned battle style. 7 of them. Not 1, not even 2 or 3, but 7. Whole legacy clans were created around a single legacy relic. Sonny couldn't even imagine what he would be able to do with 7. Start a family and turn it into the most powerful clan in the world? No, that would mean putting all his eggs into one basket. Better create several clans. Right. Why start a family when you can start 7? Wait, no, that didn't sound right. Right? Consumed by avarice, Sonny looked at the rising sun with an excited grin. This was great. This was incredible. However, his excitement was short-lived. Yeah, right. I would have to get back to the real world first, and that's not going to happen. Turning his head slightly, he stared at the distant silhouette of the Crimson Spire and lost himself in thought. A while later, Effie's voice brought him back to reality. Hey, doofus! Breakfast is ready. Why are you spacing out and smiling like an idiot? Sonny answered without thinking. Just thinking about creating a legacy clan. Have you ever thought about creating a clan, huh, Effie? The robust huntress stared at him for a few seconds with a strange expression, and then grinned. Is that an invitation? Still lost in thought, Sonny tilted his head and glanced at her astutely. Huh. Not bad, not bad. The choice of a partner has to be of the utmost importance when starting a legacy clan. Take Effie, for example. She is a very fearsome awakened. Her aspect is extravagant and powerful beyond belief. Plus, her physique is nothing short of divine. Any heir she gives birth to is bound to be both strong and gorgeous. A very suitable candidate, I guess. Huh? What? No, not an invitation, just considering different options. At that moment, Sonny suddenly realized that he had been unceremoniously oogling Effie up and down for a better half of a minute, and that her grin had long turned dangerous at some point. The huntress stretched her neck and said lazily, I see. So you've chosen death. He blinked. No, wait, I didn't mean it like that. I was just, theorizing. The unruly huntress cracked her knuckles and smiled menacingly. Oh, so you were theorizing about me, huh? Do tell, do tell. No, 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 wait, stop! Surprisingly, Sonny survived. Barely. Soon after that, they left the grandiose marble arch and continued their journey into the depths of the labyrinth. Before the expedition started, Nephis had told him that they had a fast and comparatively safe way to reach the southern edges of the Forgotten Shore, as much as anything could be safe in this cursed place. Without it, getting to their destination would have taken them months. Now that they had left the Dark City, Sonny finally decided to satisfy his curiosity and ask what that mysterious method of traveling with incredible speed was. When he heard the answer, he just stared blankly at Changing Star for a few minutes, trying to guess if she was kidding or not. She wasn't. In the end, he didn't even ask any questions and just waved his hand dejectedly. There was no point. If Nephis had come to know of this secret from Cassie's visions and believed that it was doable, then he did not have to worry. Too much. It's not like he could turn back now, anyway. Plus, the expedition had shown itself to be extremely lucrative for him so far. Mere days after its start, he had already gotten plenty of shadow fragments and an ascended memory, not to mention making a breakthrough in his exploration of battle styles and earning an aspect legacy for his effort. In any case, they had to travel about a week's worth of time south to get the chance to access that fast method of travel. The heights they were going to use on the way as shelters during the nights there were planned in advance, with the help of the Forgotten Shore map Nephis had created. To make sure that these shelters were really where the map showed and remove any possibility of ending up stranded in the middle of the labyrinth with no way to escape the Dark Sea, she had even employed Kai during that week that Sonny had spent with Effie. The charming archer scouted the way ahead and confirmed that her map was correct. Now, the only danger they really faced from the Forgotten Shore itself was that of a sudden storm. However, with a true oracle in the ranks of the cohort, this danger was dramatically diminished. Now that Cassie had grown in her powers and absorbed a lot of soul essence, she was often able to warn them in advance if something like that was going to happen. There were also the usual perils of the labyrinth, of course. And as they went deeper into its deadly maze, the situation slowly began to turn from bad to worse.